Hello there, friends. It's budget day. And you know what that means. That's right, it's the budget. Points for you. It's Rachel Reeves' first budget, and in fact, the first Labour budget for 15 years. It's the first budget by a female chancellor. I'm sure she definitely won't be mentioning that. And it's going to be an interesting exercise in just seeing what exactly Labour is about now that they've won power. You know, they've been in power for, I don't know, 3-4 months at this point. But this is the first major sort of political set piece of the new parliament where we actually got to find out, okay, what's the nitty gritty? What are you actually going to do? My attitude going into this, I suppose, is cautious pessimism, maybe. I don't expect I'm going to be blown away by it. I might not even necessarily like it. I don't know. But I don't think it's going to be particularly worse than I'm expecting. There we are. That's a glowing expectation for you, isn't it? So going into this, oh wow, okay. Well, Drew just appears in the chat and says austerity over, all in capitals. All right then. Well, my expectations have been just peaked a little bit more. Going into this, what have I heard already? I've heard that possibly she's going to be fiddling around with the way that they calculate debt. Maybe modeling it after the way that other countries do it, in a way that will obviously mean that more can be spent or borrowed in the meantime. So she's going to sort of cook the books officially, maybe. I don't know. That's one thing I've heard about. I know that the living wage, minimum wage, is going to go up to, I want to say £12.20, round about £12.20 in April of next year, which I think is a reasonable rise. They can't all be as big as they have been the last few years, kind of tracing the high inflation that we had. But yeah, that seems solid enough. I will give that to the Tories, by the way. Back end of their time in power, they did some good minimum wage rises for the final couple of years. I know what you're going to say. But you know, it was inflation. I was like, yeah, but you know, at least I'm saying that they did rather than they didn't. We have Cynical Eel here in the chat. Hello there. In the stream even. Hello there, Cynical Eel.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I take it you have already seen the budget.
I have indeed. In fact, I watched the entire thing live on my TV from when it began at 1:35 and then ended at 1:50.
I see. See, I feel like I want to kind of react to most of what's in this budget kind of as I see it. So rather than preempting it, at least. So what I will ask you, Tom, rather than your thoughts on the budget so far, I want to ask you, what were your thoughts prior to the budget? What were you expecting coming into this?
I was expecting basically unrelenting and brutal, savage cuts to most things and most government departments, with some government departments in particular being targeted, like local government, welfare, housing, and justice ministry being in particular targeted. I basically was expecting George Osborne's 2010 budget on steroids. That's essentially what my anticipation was before the budget was announced today.
Okay, so slight spoilers for me here, but in a word, George Osborne on steroids, yes or no?
No, it wasn't that at all, but it wasn't good either. I'll say that much so far.
Oh, well, there we are. You tapered expectations. I've got a feed for it here on YouTube, so I'll bring it up here. Let me just find our place in the stream.
Money to send it up.
Secured, and it's
Our leisure centre.
local leader.
This House and all of its democratically elected MPs, not to mention to Mr. Speaker and the Chairman of Ways and Means. I really don't need any help.
Come on. But, oh, there we are. All right, then. Right, how do you want to play this? I guess I'll just watch it kind of as she says things. I'll pause it. I'll see what your thoughts are, read out some comments. The usual spiel. I feel for you, Tom, having already watched it once in the last few hours, now going through it a second time. You brave man.
I mean, a part of me would prefer. Has the BBC got the budget in written form on their website yet, or are they still typing it up?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I've kind of just jumped straight into this as soon as I've got back.
Oh, right, okay. The only reason I ask is because this goes on for a long time. It went on for an hour and a half.
I'm open-minded to skipping it in places or putting it on higher speeds to watch it.
Actually, from what I remember, the first 15 minutes is basically a spiel about how the Tories were terrible, ruined everything, and how it's great that Labour's in, changed Labour Party, and identity politics with the first female chancellor stuff. So you could probably fast forward 15 minutes before we actually get into any kind of policy stuff.
I mean, I'll say this much, right? Obviously, on the whole first female chancellor thing, I'm happy for Rachel Reeves in that. Goes without saying pretty much that I support the idea of, oh yeah, women ascending to the heights of whatever jobs are on offer. But if she bangs on about it a lot, I'm going to find myself just thinking, you're not really breaking the glass ceiling when you're the first woman in the second most important job in the government, because there've already been 3 women in the most important job in government.
She goes on about it for about, I'd say, 5 minutes at the very beginning of her speech, but she doesn't mention it afterwards.
All the little girls in the country will look at the screen and say, "Mummy, I want to be a chancellor."
She did say that, yeah. That was one thing she mentioned.
Oh dear. All right then. Let's get going. Can you hear it all right?
Yep, I can hear it.
Lovely. All right. Hello to the chat real quick. Dr. Zayas says, what about the buses? I heard that the buses, they were going to change the thing where at the moment it's £2 for a journey, and then they're going to raise it to £3 for a journey. So they're not quite
that's
keeping
what
it at the
they're
same
doing.
level. Right. Anyway, let's go.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On July the 4th, the country voted for change. Yeah. This government was given a mandate to restore stability to our economy and to begin a decade of national renewal. Yeah. To fix the foundations and deliver change through responsible leadership in the national interest. That,
putting country before party, and the grown-ups are back in charge,
is our task. And I know that we can achieve it. My belief in Britain burns brighter than ever, and the prize on offer is immense. As my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, said on Monday, change must be felt. More pounds in people's pockets, an NHS that is there when you need it, an economy that is growing, creating wealth and opportunity for all, because that is the only way to improve living standards. Yeah. And the only way to drive economic growth is to invest, invest, invest. Yeah. There are no shortcuts. And to deliver that investment, we must restore economic stability and turn the page on the last 14 years. Yeah.
Is this where we hear about the last 14 years? I mean, I'm familiar with the last 14 years. I don't mind them going over it, but I do also hear about the last 14 years a lot.
This is not the first time that it has fallen to the Labour Party to rebuild Britain. In 1945, it was the Labour Party that rebuilt our country from the rubble of the Second World War. In 1964, it was the Labour Party that rebuilt Britain with the white heat of technology. And in 1997, it was the Labour Party that rebuilt our schools and hospitals.
All right. Yeah. Solid enough framing device. Here are the times that we've won power in the past. Here's, some nice little callbacks. 1945, the white hot heat of the revolution, the Blair landslide, etc. Where the latest one? Where the next lot of Labour to come along and do all those great things that you love a Labour government doing. All right. That's the pitch thus far.
Today, it falls to this Labour Party, to this Labour government, to rebuild Britain once again. And while this is the first budget in more than 14 years to be delivered by a Labour Chancellor, it is the first budget in our country's history to be delivered by a woman. I am deeply proud to be Britain's first ever female Chancellor of the Exchequer. To girls and young women everywhere, I say, let there be no ceiling on your ambition.
I actually said ceiling, didn't I? I actually said the phrase glass ceiling, with reference to, Prime Minister, Chancellor. Anyway.
Your hopes and your dreams.
Why be a Rachel Reeves when you could be a Liz Truss?
And along with the pride that I feel standing here today, there is also a responsibility to pass on a fairer society and a stronger generation to the next generation of women. Madam Deputy Speaker, the party opposite failed our country.
Yeah,
Hello.
by the way, that bit about that whole first women chancellor thing, that's the last time she mentions it. She doesn't mention it again afterwards, so just for future reference.
Okay, well, fair play in that case then. Because at first, from the way that you put it, I kind of got the impression that she spends the first 15 minutes kind of just banging on about that and the Tories and blah, blah, blah. But if that's all she does on it, has a few little lines about it, I'm proud to be the first female chancellor, no limits to ambition, blah, blah, blah. That's fine.
No.
It's not being overdone in that case, then it's fine.
Oh, no. It's not done in that sense. It's not hyper fixated on. It is pretty much a sort of. It's more of a historical commentary than anything else. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm the first woman chancellor. This will be a proof to all women in Britain that there's no limits to your ambitions, and if you set your mind to it, you can do whatever you want. That's essentially what her speech was.
Fair play then. Fair play. But we haven't got onto a good bit of Tory bashing yet. I think the Tory bashing is right around the corner.
Oh, there's going to be a lot of that in this speech.
Oh, all right. Well, we're going to have some Tory bashing. And then if it goes on and on and on, we might skip till we start getting to some actual policies.
Their austerity broke our National Health Service.
Hey!
Their Brexit deal harmed British businesses.
Hey!
And their mini budget left families paying the price with higher mortgages.
Hey!
The British people have inherited their failure. A black hole in the public.
I wish I was just about to say she's going to say black hole, and she beat me to it. She said black hole.
Yeah, she mentions black hole a few times.
I should have made a bingo card for this. Right? What? No, you've already seen it. I can't ask you what we're going to have. That's cheating. No, never mind.
Finances. Public services on their knees. A decade of low growth and the worst parliament on record for living standards. Let me begin with the public finances. In July, I exposed a £22 billion black hole at the heart of the previous government's plans. A series of promises that they made but had no money to deliver. Covered up from the British people, covered up from this House. The Treasury's reserve, set aside for genuine emergencies, spent 3 times over, just 3 months into the financial year. Today, on top of the detailed document that I have provided to the House in July, the government is publishing a line-by-line breakdown of the £22 billion black hole that we inherited.
They're really crucifying the Tories on this 22 billion black hole, aren't they? If they're publishing an entire thing to say this is how it's all calculated, this is where all the money's missing, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, yeah, because it's a very core feature of her speech. The overall theme of her speech is basically one of, I'm making a lot of tough decisions on taxes, not so much spending, but definitely on taxes. I don't want to do this, but I'm doing it because you left me a mess, and if you don't like it, it's your fault.
So it is in a sense. Well, there's similar vibes I'm getting to sort of like beginning of the coalition government, early 2010s, where they were all like Labour crashed the economy, so now we've got to do austerity. So now Rachel Reeves is, shoe very much firmly on the other foot now and saying, look, the state of the country, the Tories are the ones that have been in charge for yay long. I'm now going to have to do these things. That's the framing device for this budget then, isn't it? It's like anything I do that's unpopular, blame the Tories for why I'm doing it.
It is, but I would say that the interesting point of Osborne comparison is that it's not entirely like Osborne because, as you'll see, she doesn't attack the spending angle that much and instead focuses a lot on taxes.
That's it. I suppose it's a similarity rhetorically, at the very least.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Frank in the chat says, I sent a link on side that I don't know if you saw it. I'll post it in the Twitter chat now. Yeah, no, we haven't had the link appear in the in here, but I'll take a look in the Twitter chat. Thank you, Frank.
It shows hundreds of unfunded pressures on the public finances this year and into the future too. The Office for Budget Responsibility have published their own review of the circumstances.
Oh, Frank's actually sent me a Rachel Reeves bingo card. Do you want to take a look at this just for a quick laugh?
I haven't seen this because I've only just come on the stream just like you, but yeah, sure, let's see what the bingo card looks like then.
Okay then. So folks out there who are watching this for the first time like me, play along at home, take a screenshot of this or something if you want, or jot them down. What have we got? Multiple mentions of the budget black hole. Well, we've had that one already. ISA limit changes. Changes to marriage allowance. IHT APR reform. Increases to local government funding. Changes to non-dom status. Getting people back into work. Fuel duty increase. Labour is the party of working people. Above inflation increase to NHS funding. Dividends, IT rates increase. 14 years of X slagging off previous government. Yeah, we'll definitely have that one. Minimum wage, living wage reform increases. Labour is the party of business. Oh, hang on. If I click it, I could actually update it in real time. All right then. So we've had the black hole. We can have the free one. Adults are back in the room or equivalent to sensible policies. We might have had that, but I'll let it off for now. We have to make tough decisions. Pensions, debt. All right. I'll try and keep an eye out for some of these while we're watching then and see what wants to be updated on it. That's a bit of fun. Thank you very much for that, Frank. Also in the chat here, Frank says, that isn't mine, by the way. I robbed it from a Discord server. And Joey says, hi, Swiss, listening from work. Hello there, guys. All right, let's crack on. We've got at least another hour of this, if not more. Let's get into it.
Around the spring budget forecast. They say that the previous government, and I quote, did not provide the OBR with all the information to them. And had they known about these undisclosed pressures that have since come to light, then their spring budget forecast for spending would have been, and I quote again, materially different.
So what she's saying here then is that the previous Tory government withheld certain information that the Office of Budget Responsibility would have used in their calculations. And if they had had access to that information, then it would have painted a much more dour picture than what we ended up getting near the beginning of the year. That's what she's putting out there, essentially.
Yeah, pretty much. Essentially, the claim that Reeves has made since the end of the election, if not beforehand, but definitely the end of the election, was basically the Tories, around the time of the spring budget, withheld a lot of financial information from the Office of Budgetary Responsibility, and that hindered their efforts to essentially do their job, which is do spending forecasts and growth forecasts.
And what have others said about this claim that Rachel Reeves is making then? Like, is it backed up by things that the OBR themselves have said? Is it sort of seen as being fairly on the mark as a criticism of the Tories and government then?
The OBR have said that it is generally correct, yes. But they have yet, although they might have done it now, because she said that, and in that speech, that they were going to release proof of the 22 billion black hole. They may have done it now, but up until this point, they have said that, yeah, generally she's telling the truth, that they didn't give us the information we needed to do our job for whatever reason. But we'll have to see exactly the details when the OBR publishes their report at some point soon.
Okay, then. So as far as the OBR is concerned, the general gist of we didn't get all the info we needed is correct, but anything more specific than that, we're still lacking at the moment.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, cheers for that.
Let me be clear. That means any comparison between today's forecast and the OBR's March forecast is false. Because the party opposite hid the reality of their public spending plans. Yet, at the very same budget, they made another £10 billion worth of cuts to national insurance. It was the height of irresponsibility, and they knew it, because they had run out of road and they called an election to avoid making difficult choices.
Oh, hang on. Difficult choices. I've got that on my bingo card. Well, we have to make tough decisions, but close enough. Close enough.
Difficult decisions and tough decisions are the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's we're doing unpopular stuff, so meh.
This promise to the British people. Never again will we allow a government to play fast and loose with our public finances. And never again will we allow a government to hide the true state of our public finances from our independent forecaster.
How much more of this have we got before we get on to announcements?
I'd say another 5-ish minutes.
I'm going to skip.
What memory serves me.
I'm going to skip 2.5 minutes ahead and see where we're at there.
I just mentioned respecting colleagues. The public are watching. They want to hear what the Chancellor has to say.
Yeah, we're the public. We're watching. Doesn't matter that I skipped the last 2 minutes. I want to hear.
I would politely suggest that honourable members listen to this, because it includes funding for vital compensation schemes for victims of two terrible injustices. The infected blood scandal and the post office horizon.
Oh, okay, we're on to something already then. Infected blood scandal and the post office horizon issues. Because it was sorry to interrupt. At the very back end of the Sunak government before the election, I think they had announced that they were going to do some compensation for the blood scandal, but then obviously the election happened, so that's following on from that, I think.
Yeah, it is. Basically, there are two scandals that happened just before the election. Well, not happened, but there was new reports and new recommendations for two scandals that happened in British history. One was the post office scandal, and the other was the infected blood scandal. I'm not going to get these 100% correct because I've only given a brief overview, so if I get some things wrong, just bear with me on that. But basically, the infected blood scandal was where people who were, I think, predominantly haemophiliacs, were given blood transfusions with blood infected with diseases like HIV and AIDS without their knowledge.
And then I know the post office one was the IT system had it looking like people were pinching money when actually they weren't, and they ended up
basically for the post office scandal, there was an IT system set up by a Japanese company called Fujitsu, which was installed into multiple post offices, and basically post office masters were seeing funds going missing, reporting it, and they were being accused of stealing the funds themselves. And a lot of people went to prison for this, lost their jobs, and were socially ostracized. And then it was revealed, funnily enough, by a Japanese newspaper in Japan, that with emails within Fujitsu, that wasn't actually what was happening, but instead the software was faulty, and then it made its way into Britain, and then it became a huge scandal.
Well, I'd say then on both counts, if you've got either people being criminally convicted of things that they haven't done because of faulty software, and obviously at the time this was going on, Royal Mail was still ran by the state, wasn't it? It was before it had been sold off, I think.
Yes.
And in relation to the blood scandal, I mean, Jesus Christ, obviously, you know, you go to hospital to get better. You don't go there to be given you diseases with dodgy blood. Both counts, I think compensation is definitely justified.
Yeah, the compensation that was recommended by the two inquiries into both of them numbered in the billions, which she's just about to explain now.
Okie dokie.
Scandal. The leader of the opposition rightly made an unequivocal apology for the injustice of the infected blood scandal on behalf of the British state. But he did not budget for the costs of compensation. Today, for the very first time, we will provide specific funding to compensate those infected and those affected in full. With £11.8 billion in this budget. And I am also today setting aside £1.8 billion to compensate victims of the Post Office Horizon scandal.
So we've got about 13, 14, 15 billion or so going for both of these. So that's a sizable chunk of money, isn't it? You know, it's not pennies.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot of money, especially for the infected blood scandal. I'm not sure if this is what was recommended by the inquiry into both of them, but nonetheless, that's what she has said that they'll be given, which is fair enough, because I think that I'm not entirely sure if it's correct or not, so I could be wrong about this, but I think people did actually die as a result of the infected blood scandal.
I mean, if what you're saying that people, you know, some of people were getting like HIV or AIDS as a result of it, then yeah, that's you know, that's going to have serious consequences. So I guess what I'd say to this then is that, you know, I'm absolutely wholeheartedly in support of saying, yes, we should compensate the people affected by this, because this is ultimately the responsibility of these, you know, whether it's the NHS or the Royal Mail, back when they were state owned, the buck stops with the government on that. And where there's been serious failings, it's right that they're the ones to do something about it. But obviously the natural progression is then to say, okay, there's this many billion that have been earmarked for it. Explain to us further in your budget what you're going to do in relation to either borrowing money or taxation, or, you know, how we're going to balance this all out. That's the next question, I suppose.
Redress that is long overdue for the pain and injustice that they have suffered. Madam Deputy Speaker, the leadership campaign for the party opposite has now been going on for over 3 months. But in all that time, not one single apology for what they did to our country.
I'm not quite sure that's true. I think one or two of the candidates have apologised. Well, I don't know. Depends what they've apologised for. I think they've apologised in vague terms about we let you down and that's why we lost the election. Maybe not so much every single thing the Tories did wrong in power, but I don't know. I'm nitpicking here, aren't I?
I think, to be fair, the two who are currently running haven't actually apologised. So I know what she's saying.
I think James Cleverly hadn't he? But obviously he's not in anymore.
Yeah, he did, but the other two didn't.
Fair play.
Because the Conservative Party has not changed. But this is a changed Labour Party.
Oh, I see. If I was making my own bingo card, I would have put changed Labour Party on the bingo card. And Country First Party second, that as well.
Stability to our country once again. The scale and seriousness of the situation that we have inherited cannot be underestimated. Together, the hole in our public finances this year, which recurs every year, the compensation schemes that they did not fund, and their failure to assess the scale of the challenges facing our public services means that this budget raises taxes by £40 billion.
Chancellor? Yeah, this is where you get into the actual policy subject now. This is
Wow.
where, from this point forward, it's all just policies now. No more spiel.
She's she's just gone straight into that, hasn't she? I mean, she's done the setup, hasn't she? She's done the whole rigmarole of, oh, look at what the Tories did. They weren't honest with us. They mismanaged the public finances, didn't budget for this, got to compensate these people, blah, blah, blah. But then, so that's the setup for it. But then, boom, 40 billion of tax increases. My God.
Yeah, this is just day-to-day discretional spending as well. This isn't even including things like capital spending or investment or anything of that nature.
All right then. Well, we're getting into the juicy bits now.
Standing here today would have to face this reality. And any responsible Chancellor would take action. That is why today I am restoring stability to our public finances and rebuilding our public services. As a former...
Is rebuilding our public services on my bingo card? No, I'm not seeing it there.
Economist at the Bank of England, I know what it means to respect our economic institutions. I want to put on record my thanks to the Governor of the bank, Andrew Bailey, and to the Independent Monetary Policy Committee. Today, I can confirm that we will maintain the MPC's target of 2% inflation, as measured by the 12-month increase in the Consumer Prices Index. I want to thank James Bowler, the Permanent Secretary to the Treasury, and my team of officials. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would also like to thank my predecessors as Chancellor of the Exchequer for their wise counsel as I have prepared for this budget. In particular, I would like to thank the former Right Honourable Member for Spelthorne for his invaluable advice in this weekend's papers, where he concluded that his mini-budget, and I quote, wasn't perfect. Well, for once, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think him and I are in absolute...
I thought she was actually going to be nice to him then. She swerved me.
Agreement. Finally, I want to thank Richard Hughes and his team at the Office for Budget Responsibility for their work in preparing today's economic and fiscal outlook. Let me now take the House through that forecast. The cost of living crisis under the last government stretched household finances to their limit, with inflation hitting a peak of above 11%. Today, the OBR say that CPI inflation will average 2.5% this year, 2.6% in 2025, then 2.3% in 2026, 2.1% in 2027, 2.1% in 2028, and 2.0% in 2029. Next, I move on to economic growth. Today's budget marks an end to short-termism. So I am pleased that for the first time, the OBR have published not only 5-year growth forecasts, but a detailed assessment of the growth impacts of our policies over the next decade too.
Oh, you should have
And the
seen
new
the
charter
reaction to this statement when it came out from Reeves. You had a whole bunch of very stable individuals who came out and said, "Oh, Rachel Reeves is doing a 5-year plan, just like the Soviet Union did."
Oh, oh dear. Oh my goodness. Or not just a 5-year plan, but a 10-year plan. It's double communism.
Yep, double the communism, typical Labour.
That's what you get
for
with
Budget
Labour.
Responsibility, which I am publishing today, confirms that this will become a permanent feature of our framework.
Okay, well that's interesting at least. Not just 5-year forecasts now, but 10-year forecasts also.
It's a long, long overdue thing because one of the core criticisms of the British government, both domestically and internationally, is it is unable to think beyond the next election. So this, hopefully, would go a bit of a way of installing more of a long-term thinking culture within the government.
All right, well, it's something. It's something.
The OBR forecast that real GDP growth will be 1.1% in 2024, 2.0% in 2025, 1.8% in 2026, 1.5% in 2027, 1.5% in 2028, and 1.6% in 2029. And the OBR are clear. This budget will permanently increase the supply capacity of the economy, boosting long-term growth. Every budget, it might sound shocking to them, but this government is boosting long-term economic growth. Every budget that I deliver will be focused on our mission to grow the economy. And underpinning that mission are the 7 key pillars of our growth strategy, developed and delivered alongside business, all driven forward by our excellent Financial Secretary to the Treasury. First, and most important, is to restore economic stability. That is my focus today. Second, increasing investment and building new infrastructure is vital for productivity. So we are catalysing £70 billion of investment through our National Wealth Fund. And we are transforming our planning.
Ooh, £70 billion of investment. That's a very large sounding number. It'll be interesting to see what that's going to be on and over what time frame, I suppose.
Rules to get Britain building again. Third, to ensure that all parts of the UK can realise their potential, we are working with the devolved governments and partnering with our mayors to develop local growth plans. Fourth, to improve employment prospects and skills, we are creating Skills England, delivering our plans to make work pay and tackling economic inactivity. Fifth, we are launching our long-term...
What's that, sorry?
The skills wallets.
Oh, the
Those
skills.
old things the Lib Dems came up with in the 2019 election.
Long-time viewers will be sick of this anecdote because I tell it every few years. But when I was in school, they had posters up around the school about the importance of getting skills. But they spelt skills with a Z instead of an S on the end to get down with the kids.
How do you do, fellow kids?
Have you got skills? Get some skills, kids. Yeah, it's cool. Get some skills. I'm sick of hearing about skills. I mean, I'm not saying it's not a good thing to go for, but can we just come up with a different word rather than skills? Any other word?
Experience, maybe?
Yeah, experience. I don't know. I'm complaining for the sake of complaining. I should let the woman speak. See what else she's got to say.
Her modern industrial strategy and expanding opportunities for our small and medium-sized businesses to grow. Sixth, to drive innovation, we are protecting record funding for research and development to harness the full potential of the UK's science base. And finally, to maximise the growth benefits of our clean energy mission, we have confirmed key investments such as carbon capture and storage to create jobs in our industrial heartlands. Our approach is already having an impact. Just 2 weeks ago, we delivered an international investment summit, which saw businesses commit £63.5 billion of investment into our country, creating nearly 40,000 jobs across the United.
See, this is where I, as the layman, begin to get a little bit lost. When she sort of says about a minute ago, she said like £70 billion of investment, and now she's saying like about business generating £63 billion of investment. I'm trying to, in my mind, contextualize those numbers and like, do they overlap with one another or are they separate?
It depends upon who is doing the investment. If it's private investment that makes up the 70 billion, then they overlap with each other. But if it isn't, and it's simply investment from the government, then what you basically have is you have 70 billion from the government and then a further 63 billion in private investment. But I don't know which is which. I don't know whether it's a combination of the two or whether the two are separate, because it's not really made clear.
No, but if nothing else, it's worth us pointing out that so far we are ignorant of that in the way that she has explained it so far, rather than just nodding along and going, oh, yes, 70 billion, 63 billion, yeah, okay.
Kingdom. But we cannot undo 14 years of damage in one go. Economic growth will be our mission for the duration of this Parliament. Madam Deputy Speaker, In our manifesto, we set out the fiscal rules that would guide this government. I am confirming those today. Our stability rule and our investment rule. The stability rule means that we will bring the current budget into balance so that we do not borrow to fund day-to-day spending. We will meet this rule in 2029-30 until that becomes the third year of the forecast. From then on, we will balance the current budget in the third year of every budget held annually each autumn. That will provide a tougher constraint on day-to-day spending so that difficult decisions cannot be constantly delayed or deferred.
I got a little bit lost there when she was saying about the third year of each budget and so on. But I think the overall crux of it, from what I'm getting, is that in terms of day-to-day spending, not spending to invest or whatever, but just for, you know, keeping the lights on, keeping the services running, so to speak, by the end of this parliament, they no longer want there to be a budget deficit when it comes to day-to-day spending. That's the message thus far, right?
Yeah, it seems to be that what they're trying to aim for is a budget surplus by the year 2027. That seems to be the goal that they're trying to pursue.
Okay, but by the year 2027, I'd got from that 29-30 was when they wanted to have it flipped or balanced even, or was there another thing?
I think they said within the third year of, well, basically the third budget or third fiscal year, they're trying to aim for a budget surplus.
Ah, right. I see. So when she said by the third year of the budget, so by year 3 of this government, that's what they want to be facing. That's the situation they want to be. Okay. As far as day-to-day spending goes, that's where we're at so far, right? Put a pin in that. What next?
The OBR say that the current budget will be in deficit by £26.2 billion in 2025-26 and £5.2 billion in 2026-27, before moving into surplus of £10.9
Oh, yeah, there we are. You're spot on.
billion in 2027-28, £9.3 billion in 2028-29, and £9.9 billion in 2029-30, meeting our stability rule 2 years early.
Right, I understand now. So the stability rule, as they put it, is 29-30, but in terms of what the forecast is saying where they'll end up, they'll actually get there a couple of years early. There we are.
Yeah, if their economic plans go to plan.
Yes. Assuming, you know, all of the information they fed into the OBR machine comes out in the way that the OBR says it will.
Finance data show that government borrowing in the first 6 months of this year was already running significantly higher than the OBR's March forecast. And so the OBR confirmed today that borrowing in this financial year is now £127 billion, reflecting the inheritance left by the party opposite. The increase in the net cash requirement in 2024-25 is lower than the increase in borrowing, at £22.3 billion higher than the spring forecast. Because of the action that we are taking, borrowing falls from 4.5% of GDP this year to 2.1% of GDP by the end of the forecast. Public sector net borrowing will be £105.6 billion in 2025-26, £88.5 billion in 2026-27, £72.2 billion in 2027-28, £71.9 billion in 2028-29, and £70.6 billion in 2029-2030. Madam Deputy Speaker, before I come to tax, it is vital that we are driving efficiency and reducing wasteful spending. In July, to begin delivering and dealing with our inheritance, I made £5.5 billion of savings this year. Today, we are setting a 2% productivity, efficiency and savings target for all departments to meet next year by using technology more effectively and joining up services across government. As set out in our manifesto, I will shortly be appointing...
So is this like a sort of like a trim the fat kind of policy? We want all the departments to either like spend 2% less or do the same amount they're already doing, but spending 2% less, or getting 2% better outcomes than they are currently on the same money, something like that. Some kind of a little we're setting a rule to say we work harder. Point finger, work harder. There we go. Do more.
Our COVID Corruption Commissioner.
Oh, now this one I'm interested in because I remember her talking about this, trying to reclaim some of this COVID money from way back when that ended up in the hands of some dodgy companies or just disappeared altogether. And I've had no idea what the likelihood of their success in this would be, but I had been interested to hear more about it.
They will lead our work to uncover those companies that used a national emergency to line their own pockets. Because that money belongs in our public services and taxpayers want that money back. And I can confirm today that David Goldstone has been appointed as the chair of the new Office for Value for Money to help us realise the benefits from every pound of public spending. Today, I am also taking 3 steps to ensure that welfare spending is more sustainable. First, we inherited the last government's plans to reform the work capability assessment. We will deliver those savings as part of our fundamental reforms to the health and disabilities benefit system that my right honourable friend, the Work and Pensions Secretary, will bring forward. Second, I can today announce a crackdown on fraud in our welfare system, often the work of criminal gangs. We will expand DW.
I should put criminal gangs on my bingo card. We're not even talking about immigration, and we got some criminal gangs this time round.
Smash the gangs.
Smash the gangs. So what she just said there, she said that the Tories were planning reforms to the work capability assessments, and we're going to go forwards and reform it. As
yeah, pretty much.
To that effect. Right. Okay.
I think from what memory serves me on the work capability assessments is they were actually better than what came before, which is surprising from the Tories, because originally before, the way it was worked with the work capability assessments is that they focused heavily on shaming people for not being in work and essentially belittling them at every opportunity and trying to undermine them at every opportunity. And also, in addition to that, for people who were disabled, there was a focus on just ignoring that fact at all and still trying to push them into work because you were putting people who were not medically qualified to make decisions on these particular issues. Whereas what these reforms to the work capability assessment are, to my knowledge at least anyway, is there's more of a focus on getting people with medical experience in to assess people who are disabled rather than people who aren't. And there's more of a focus on career advice rather than shaming people. So instead of making people feel awful for being on welfare, there's essentially a focus on career advice, finding out about the person. Finding out about the person. I was going to say, finding out about the person's experience and background, etc., and essentially giving them ways to get back into work. That's what I've heard they're going to do anyway.
Okay. Sorry for talking over you there. So what you've just outlined there, is that actually what the Tories had been planning to bring in, the changes that they were going to do, and Labour are just going to carry it forwards? Because as you say, that does go against my my preconceptions of what I'd expect from the Tories. Sort of, I'd always kind of just go, oh, any changes the Tories make to the benefit system is just going to be to, be bastards to people, basically. But on this occasion, it looks like these are. I mean, like when you say, oh, bringing in like actual medical experts to assess people rather than just whoever's down at the office for work and pensions or whatever.
It's a mixture of both. The bit about the doctor thing and the medical profession, that was a Tory plan, but the way they did it was incredibly vague, and the way that they classed somebody as a medical professional was not exactly the best way to do it. Like for the Tory criteria of being a medical professional, it was as weak as having a GCSE in health and social care. It was as weak as that. Whereas with the Labour proposal,
that's like me saying that because I've done first aid training, I'm a paramedic.
Well,
You
that's
know?
essentially the Tory logic behind it. But with the Labour proposal, they're essentially trying to use doctors, GPs, nurses, and if it's possible to do so, family doctors who will have the knowledge of that person's medical conditions and then submit that as evidence for their claim. As for the bit about career advice, that's entirely Labour proposal. That was something Liz Kendall talked about quite a lot, both when they got into government and during the campaign. So that's a new policy from Labour, that is.
All right. Thank you for that, Tom.
Using innovative new methods to prevent illegal activity and provide new legal powers to crack down on fraudsters, including direct access to bank accounts to recover debt. This package saves £4.3 billion a year by the end of the forecast. Third.
Okay, right. So what she's just discussed there, labelling it as £4.3 billion of savings. I need to try and remember some of these other figures we've heard about from other places. You know, the 70 billion of investment and the 15 billion for compensation. Or was the compensation part of the 70 billion, or was that a separate 70 billion? Am I getting mixed up now already? But I'm just trying to log these numbers in my head and go, right, okay, what she said on the spending pile, what she said on the saving or income pile. And so far, the first bit of saving stroke income that I've heard is 4.3 billion.
Third, the government will shortly be publishing...
Oh, sorry. Were you jumping in there? Nope.
The Get Britain Working...
Sorry, go on.
Obviously. With the 4.3 billion for welfare, this is the thing that I'm most skeptical about, because I honestly don't know where she got that figure from, because fraud in welfare, to my knowledge at least anyway, it's not my area of expertise. So if anyone is expert in it, they can correct me. But to my knowledge, I don't think it's that high.
Is the number that she just quoted there, the 4.3 billion, is that also encompassing the money that they're trying to get back from the COVID, like the COVID money that they're chasing up as well? Because you mentioned that one just before this, so possibly that's bound up in it as well, maybe.
It could be that. She also could talk about this is how much we're going to save throughout the whole Parliament. If she said that this is how much we'll save throughout the whole Parliament, then I'll be like, that sounds pretty believable, yeah. But if it's one fiscal year, I'm expressing serious doubts about that, to be honest.
This is the and it's the same whether it's a Tory budget we're looking at or indeed a Labour budget now, which is when you're just sort of sitting here listening to it without additional information in front of you, and they say, oh, 10 billion here, 5 billion there, 6 billion here, 2 billion there, and you don't know, you know, the context, the overlap, whether it's in a single year, whether it's over the course of the Parliament, etc., then it's very hard to. You can just nod along and just kind of go, oh, right, yeah, okay, oh, yeah, billion, but not really knowing where you're at with it, you know. Podge is skeptical of money being reclaimed, says it will cost more investigating fraud than it will recover. Oh, sorry, I think that's in reference to benefits rather than the COVID. And Anne is here and says, hi, Swiss. Igneous is here and says, hello, Swiss, how is the budget looking? Hello, latecomers. It's early days in the budget so far, but what she seems to be getting us ready for is that there's going to be tax rises. There's also going to be lots of investment, and they're going to be compensating the people for the blood scandal and for the post office thing. That's kind of where we're at so far, but we're waiting on more details.
I think
tackling the root causes.
I was going to say, I am surprised about the welfare thing, because this is an area where I thought Reeves was going to do like mass cutting. Like, I was expecting things like universal credit cut in half. What's another social welfare thing? I can't think of any. Universal credit's the only one I know.
Personal independence payments.
That is what we would.
Or is that
scrap
part of Universal Credit? Oh, yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
But you were anticipating, like, when you said near the very beginning of the stream, like, oh, George Osborne austerity budget kind of thing, you were thinking, right, she's going to get in and she's going to be a bastard to people. That's what you were sort of
like I was expecting like savage, ultra harsh cuts, like as I said before, the example of like Universal Credit being cut in half. Like I was expecting stuff like that. But there was no cuts. That was the thing that most surprised me, is that there was no cuts whatsoever. It was just, we're keeping the Tory reforms on work capability assessments. We got this new fraud thing that we're doing, and some other policy I can't remember. But there was no cuts, and that was the thing that really surprised me. And when I first heard that at the budget, I thought to myself, oh, maybe this budget won't be apocalyptically awful like I thought it was going to be.
Maybe they deliberately lowered our expectations over the course of the last few months, telling us how awful everything would be. So actually they could deliver something that's just kind of there, and we go, oh, that was better than we thought it would be. That's not bad.
Yeah, the psychological tactic of keeping your expectations in the floor, and then when you get just a little bit above the floor, you go, oh my God, this is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, my expectations for this budget had been decreasing steadily ever since the election. And so far, and admittedly it's early days, we've got a lot left to get through, I haven't heard anything awful yet. But we'll see. We'll see. A couple more comments here. Podge says getting long-term sick and disabled back to work is the other policy. And Ace says wasn't as bad as I expected. Annoying buses are going up by £1 to £3, but the minimum wage is only going up by 77p, and that's not until April. Yeah, obviously, as a bus user myself, I'm naturally disappointed to hear that it's going up by £1. But in a way, I didn't know what was going to happen with it. All I knew is that the £2 scheme was going to come to an end. So for all I knew, we were going to go back to whatever the prices would be set at as standard. If they're now saying, okay, we're going to up it, but now we're going to have a £3 cap instead, I can live with it. You know, I'm obviously not pleased about it, but I can live with it. All right, let's press on, because we've got another hour of it left to go, I'm sure.
Of inactivity with an integrated approach across health, education and welfare. Yeah. And we will provide £240 million for 16 trailblazer projects targeted at those who are economically inactive and most at risk of being out of education, employment or training, to get people into work and to reduce the benefits bill. Before a government could consider any change to a tax rate or threshold, it must ensure that people pay what they already owe.
The little comment there she made about trailblazers made me laugh a bit, because trailblazer was a word that was used quite a lot during the election, so hearing it again is quite amusing.
Trailblazers. We need trailblazers to smash the criminal gangs, don't you know?
So we will invest to modernise HMRC systems using the very best technology.
We are going to replace Windows XP with Windows Vista at no expense to the taxpayer.
Oh,
and recruit
God.
additional HMRC
Don't even get me
compliance
started
and
on
debt
that. Like,
we will clamp down on those umbrella companies who exploit workers. Increase the interest rate on unpaid tax debt to ensure that people pay on time.
I just wanted to say about
go after the promoters of
the HMRC thing. Like, oh my God, don't even get me started on that. Like, there are two parts of the government, NHS and HMRC, that are just so technologically backwards that it's ridiculous. Like, you would be shocked at how bad they are technologically. Like, fax machines are frequent and widespread and still used a lot. It's not uncommon to see Windows XP being an operating system in there. Like,
well, that's why I made the joke, because there was a little bit of me that vaguely remembered, probably on this YouTube channel back in 2018, something like that, some story that broke about a bunch of NHS computers crashing because they'd been hit by some virus or ransomware because they were still running on Windows XP. And yeah. Interesting context, by the way. Frank says, I believe that the £2 bus fare cap was only meant to be a temporary measure in Sunak's first budget. When he extended it in the 2023 Tory conference, that was the only positive thing to come out of it. I remember that because I remember that was probably one of the few positives I had to say about the budget when we covered it. I went, oh yeah, the bus thing. I care about the bus thing. So yeah, Reeves, I think, had said, oh yes, it had only been factored and budgeted until the end of the year, but we'll continue it on, but make it £3 rather than £2. So like I say, you know, in an ideal world, I'd still love it to be £2. But
the thing that surprised me about this is it's been years since I used a bus, but I didn't even realise they were capped. Like, I didn't actually know about the fact that bus fares were capped until Starmer said that he was getting rid of them. Like, when I heard about that yesterday, my first reaction was, wait, they were capped in the first place? I didn't realise there was actually a bus cap. I thought that they were just set by the bus companies, similar to how prices are set in general. Didn't realise there was a cap.
No, they were capped. No cap, as the young people would say. See, look, I'm with it. Right. What else have we got? Grave Peril says 4.9% after the insurance increase to employers. Spoilers. We've not got onto that bit yet. So we'll react to that when we hear it.
That's to do with the Bank of England unemployment rate, where they're basically saying the unemployment rate is 4.9% at the moment.
Oh right, sorry. I thought that was relating to the amount employers were paying national insurance, but this is the employment rate. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll let her get to the bit of explaining that for us. Right, we'll crack on. I know I keep saying this, we've got an hour left to go, but we probably still have an hour left to go. We're probably always going to have an hour left to go. This is purgatory. You died 2 days ago. Hi, guys.
Tax avoidance schemes. These measures to reduce the tax gap raise £6.5 billion by the end of the forecast.
Oh, okay. We've got another one. £6.5 billion by the end of the forecast. Add that to the £4.3 billion that might or might not apply to a single year or the whole run of the Parliament or something. We've now reached approximately 10 billion of money, savings money or income money, versus the 70 odd billion of investment. So we're slowly getting there. We're slowly notching our way up to paying for this stuff, I guess.
Yeah, this is essentially the HMRC thing. Is essentially you're just swapping out old technology for a small amount of money, but then making loads back through increased efficiency.
I mean,
and productivity.
It makes very good sense, and it sounds like a very easy win as well. Let's spend some money now to update all the systems, and guess what? Things will be quicker and smoother with less mistakes because we don't have shitty, outdated systems. Okay.
And I want to thank the Exchequer Secretary for his outstanding work on this agenda. Yeah. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know that for working people up and down our country, family finances are stretched.
Oh, they didn't like working people. I think Labour's been in quite a bit of hot water lately where they keep using the phrase working people, but the definition of who or what a working person constitutes seems to be very vague and malleable.
Yeah, the working people jeering largely comes from the fact that last week they got embroiled in a controversy where Starmer said that if you own stocks or shares or rent property, essentially a landlord, you're not a working person. The controversy mainly came from the stocks and shares bit because many companies, if you work for them, will offer you shares in the company that you can then use to make money off. That's essentially why it became so controversial, because shares are one of the benefits you get as a salaried employee at a lot of companies.
I mean, I've bought shares in the past, like only a really low key amount of them, like through like an app on my phone, just like, oh yeah, I'll get a bit of a share in this, a bit of a share in that. It was off the wake of that whole GameStop thing where like as a meme, a bunch of people bought shares in that, and then it skyrocketed. So I got interested in it for a little while and started buying a few shares. Like it was never more than me holding about 50 quid or 100 quid in shares at any one time.
Oh
But,
yeah, that was
yeah.
where basically a Reddit forum, a subreddit, basically decided to, in their view anyway, show the world how ludicrous and ultimately fake the stock market actually is. And they did that by buying a load of shares in GameStop, which had, as a company, had been getting worse and worse and worse stock prices as a result of the rise of digital media, and it just ballooned their stock prices out of nowhere.
And
And
the and I may not be quite quoting this correctly because I'm not an expert on all the terminology, but I think there were certain things that investors could buy, like options to sort of say, we think that GameStop stock will go down in value. And you're buying a thing that says if it does go down in value, you make money because you were correct on that assumption. And because they were all buying a bunch of GameStop stocks and then it shot up in value, all these big institutions that had money in the idea of the value of these stocks going down were then poised to lose a load of money as a result of it.
yeah,
Something like that.
that's basically what happened, which is why a lot of people who are very wealthy and well connected in the financial sector were incredibly angry at the Reddit people for doing this, because they essentially were, through just their protest, destabilizing the stock market, both the global stock market and the stock market in the US. Because essentially, what they were doing is they were essentially showing that if any group of people in a large enough number got together and bought a load of stocks in their company, they could just essentially ruin the stock market with their for their own benefit. So that's why they got quite angry with them and called for the government to intervene to stop them from doing this.
So I enjoyed that sort of anarchic, chaotic element in a few years ago when all that happened. It was good fun. Gray Peril adds that GameStop was a company going out of business. I think it was, like you say, it was struggling, wasn't it, with the transition to like digital media as opposed to things being bought in like storefront
Yeah,
shops. So
like as a result of the COVID pandemic, when everybody was locked up inside and couldn't go out to buy anything, people basically decided, oh well, I'll just go buy stuff on the digital storefront, and eventually that just became ingrained into people because they found it convenient to do so, and the physical media has significantly declined as a result of that.
right. Anyway, that's a fun little sidetrack there. We'll jump
And
back in.
paychecks don't go as far as they once did. So today I am taking steps to support people with the cost of living. It was the Labour government that introduced the national minimum wage in 1999.
Yeah.
It had a transformative impact on the lives of working people. As promised in
Stop saying working people.
our manifesto, we asked the Low Pay Commission to take account of the cost of living for the first time. I can confirm that we will accept the Low Pay Commission recommendation to increase the national living wage by 6.7% to £12.21 an hour.
£12.21 an hour for those aged 21 and over. Am I right then in saying that this? I know inflation at the moment. They're saying inflation is round about just over 2% now. So if it's going up by 6 and a bit percent, obviously I appreciate that inflation has been coming down from where it had been previously. It was previously higher, but does this then mean that it's an above inflation pay increase? Is that me being a bit too optimistic? Because that's what it feels like to me. If it's going up by six odd percent and inflation's at only 2% at the moment.
From a purely statistical point of view, yes, it is an above inflation pay rise, but it has to be noted that because inflation was so high for so long, it probably won't end up feeling like that for many people, because a lot of people don't really understand how inflation actually works. Because what people essentially assume is when inflation goes up, prices will rise, which is the correct assumption. But what people get wrong is that when inflation goes down, prices will go down. That's what people get wrong with inflation. When inflation increases, it will increase. What it basically means is it means the rate at which price increases happen is it is higher basically. um but when inflation goes down, that doesn't mean prices get cheaper. That just means prices become less expensive over time. So instead of prices going up by 11% in 1 month, for example, if it was to go down inflation, it wouldn't mean prices go down by however much it goes down. It just means that it doesn't go up by 11% like it did the month before.
That's right. And I suppose as well, it's worth saying that if you've previously had a period of very high inflation where prices are going up quite rapidly, and thus the prices are much higher now than they were, say, 5 years ago, even if now you're in a period of low inflation where maybe inflation is only 2% or so, it's 2% of what is now a larger pie than it was 5 years ago. Because of the very large inflation that there was and things getting that much more expensive, a 2% rise is going to cost more now than a 2% rise would have 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or whatever.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, to use an example, let's say, for example, you have a bottle of water that's £1. If inflation is 11% 1 month, then the price of the bottle of water will go from £1 to £1 11 pence. But if the following month inflation is at 5%, for example, then that doesn't mean that that the price of the bottle of water is going to go down by 6%, but rather it will be £1 11 pence, which will then go up by 5%.
Yes,
That's how inflation works.
that makes sense. And I will say, just for the benefit of everyone, that when inflation is talked about in terms of percentages, most of the time they're discussing it in a 12-month period rather than a 1 month period, aren't they? They're sort of saying inflation in the year to September, the year to October, or whatever. So it will be the average of price changes over the course of a year rather than month on month. Because fuck me, if prices were increasing by literally like 10% 1 month, 5% the month after another thing, I'd be like, we'd be properly screwed then.
Yes.
All right then.
But there is something that is important to note actually about the minimum wage thing, because she doesn't mention it here, which I was surprised about. But in the press release that had been mentioned just before the budget with the minimum wage, they're ending wage discrimination within the minimum wage, because the way it works now, the type of minimum wage you get paid depends upon how old you are. People who are above the age of 25 get the highest amount of minimum wage possible, which would be £12.21 in this case. But if you're
hang on, if I may, I think that had been reduced. I think it was 25 once upon a time, but I think the last couple years of the Tories, they began lowering it. And I think the threshold we're at now is if you're 21 and over, you get the higher rate.
okay. So in that case, they changed it then. But yeah, but what Labour's planning to do is, and if you're below that age, you get paid less. What Labour's planning to do is they're ending that wage age discrimination. So now, I think it's 2026 when they're going to do it. In 2026, when you're 18 years old, you will get paid £12.21 minimum wage.
Those lucky Zoomers. I wish we had that when I was that age. I will say then, in absolute fairness, because from time to time I will be fair to the Tories, the Tories a few years back had set that aspect. I'm not saying that it wasn't a joint aspiration with the Tories and Labour and God knows what other parties as well, but the Tories did start down that path of over the course of a few budgets lowering that cap from 25 to lower to lower to lower, and it looks like Labour's going to finish the job and get that down to being 18 years old. So this has actually been a cross-party endeavour over the last few years, which is a refreshing thing to see.
And I mean, what makes it even more interesting is, historically speaking, the Tories were fiercely opposed to the minimum wage when Blair introduced it. Like, when Blair introduced the minimum wage in 1997, I believe it was, there was fierce resistance to it from the Tories. They couldn't do anything because of their small number of seats. But when you saw the parliamentary debates about it, they were screaming and jeering and all sorts. Like, they were saying, you're going to destroy the British economy, all the businesses are going to leave, no one's going to have any work, and blah blah blah, all that nonsense. So it's interesting to see how the Tories have gone from saying the minimum wage will destroy the British economy to gradually ending minimum wage age discrimination.
It just goes to show, doesn't it, that you can have in one period of time something which is seen by one segment of our political arena as being, absolutely out of the question, a terrible idea, beyond the pale, and then it gradually gets absorbed into the it slaps itself right in the center of the Overton window, doesn't it? It comes along and you go, well, yeah, of course. But a bit like, I think a bit like gay marriage, that once upon a time it was kind of look, the gays getting married, or civil partnerships, maybe that's a good sort of middle ground or whatever, and then finally yeah, all right, then Cameron and the Lib Dems and the rest of them brought it in, and now it's like you couldn't realistically imagine a party coming along in this current year and saying, right, we are going to scrap gay marriage now.
Yeah,
It's
like,
just,
it's a thing that only ultra right wing fringe political parties like the Heritage Party support. Even Reform UK, which is the most right wing mainstream political party there is in the country at the moment, even they don't support scrapping gay marriage. Which is interesting because UKIP, which was Reform UK's predecessor party, did and still does continue to support wanting gay marriage gone, but Reform UK is like, no, we want to keep it now. There's other examples of this as well happening. The NHS is another example. That, when it was introduced back in the 40s, was met with fierce resistance to the Tories. And then when Churchill came in, he was like, okay, fine, we'll keep it.
and I suppose you can flip the example round, because so far we've sort of said about Labour measures being adopted by the Tories, but if you want to talk about, say, the legacy of Margaret Thatcher's time in office, and then the approach that New Labour took, there were an awful lot of changes that she made, including like quite a lot of privatisation, that Labour then took on board and went, yeah, we'll carry on doing that. We'll do more privatisation as well, even though we were dead set against that sort of thing in the years prior to Thatcher. Now,
Yeah,
maybe that's not the best example, because I feel that the pendulum is beginning to swing back away from privatization again. But during that period of time, that was another example of it.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted international examples as well, it's been mentioned here by one of the commenters, but basically the Nordic welfare states were like that as well. It wasn't always the case that the Nordic countries had the extensive welfare states they do now, and their own version of the Conservatives and the right wing fiercely resisted them being put in place as well. But after a parliamentary term, they accepted all of them. And another example in the United States, as an example, is civil rights. Civil rights were met with extremely fierce counter backlash from huge parts of the United States. But after Lyndon Johnson put in place the Civil Rights Act, nobody in the US even thought about contemplating getting rid of it, because if they did, they would just be completely destroyed at the election.
And then you can have something like, again, I know it's a slightly different thing, but something which surprised me so much about the Americans, which is that I thought that something like Roe v. Wade would have never been overturned. I'd assumed that once something like that had happened, that's it. It's on the books. And then suddenly changes happen with their Supreme Court, and then it goes back to a state-by-state issue. I would not have anticipated that happening a decade ago.
I think the difference with the Roe v. Wade thing is that there was the campaign of resistance against Roe v. Wade never ended, even when Roe v. Wade was put in place. Like with the civil rights movement, the opposition to it carried on for a few years, but afterwards it became clear that running on a scrap the Civil Rights Act policy platform was going to lead to electoral oblivion, so they stopped doing it. Whereas Roe v. Wade, it never ended, and the reason for that was largely because the Christian conservative evangelical movement in the United States makes up such a huge chunk of the population that there was no real way to for it to never be a political issue.
I see. And then obviously once because in a way, I suppose it was kind of just unfortunate timing in terms of that issue that such a number of judges on the Supreme Court needed to be replaced during a period of time where Donald Trump was the one in a position to replace them with like super conservative people. If it hadn't been him in that place in that time replacing that number of judges, then the balance could have been completely different and you never would have had that being overturned. So it was, in a sense, not circumstantial in what you were saying about the the evangelical right forces that wanted it, because that absolutely was out there and continues to be. But I think it was circumstantial in just the opportunity that arose for it to be changed. It very easily could not have been changed if, say, Clinton had won in 2016, for example.
Yeah, and it's also the case as well that the difference with the Roe v. Wade and the Civil Rights Act is the Civil Rights Act is a law. It's a piece of legislation on the US statute books, whereas with Roe v. Wade, it was never codified into law. It was simply a legal precedent that remained a legal precedent. Had it been codified into law and remained a law on the US statute books, it would have been very, very difficult for it to be got rid of,
But instead,
because they would have had to go through the whole legislative process to get it through. A removal of it would have been heavily publicised and would have been met with fierce resistance. But with Roe v. Wade, it was as simple as one legal precedent replacing another legal precedent.
That was, yeah, which is fair enough to say that it was a legal precedent set down by a judgment on abortion rather than a law that was legislated about abortion. And therefore, when they sort of said, oh, well, we're going to throw it back to the states again, it then just became for each state to then interpret. Anyway, we're getting slightly bogged down away from the UK budget here. I want to read a couple of comments real quick, just on what you're saying about the Nordic countries. I want to read out the comments that were speaking of it. Podge says, some countries like the Nordics don't have minimum wage, but sectoral bargaining means they have high effective minimum wage. And A also adds, it's sort of like the Nordic welfare state too. Even the Nordic conservatives and others on the right don't want to get rid of it. I'll read a few more. NA says the TUV in Northern Ireland, as recently as 2015, opposed any redefinition of marriage. They are aligned with Reform UK. I don't know their current stance on it, though. Podge says Civil Rights Act has been gutted by the courts, though, overturned voting rights and affirmative action. Grave Peril says the issue with Roe v. Wade was that the government never agreed to make it law. It was a court judgment, as you've read out there. And finally, a couple more from NA. Religious groups have a lot of power in the US, despite it supposedly being technically a secular nation. The Supreme Court in the US has virtually no checks or balances, and there are clear examples of corruption of judges on the courts. All right, then. We are going to crack on with this budget, folks.
Worth up to £1,400 a year for a full-time worker. And for the first time, we will move towards a single adult rate phased in over time by initially increasing the national minimum wage for 18 to 20-year-olds by 16.3% as recommended by the Low Pay Commission, taking it to £10 an hour. A Labour policy to protect working people being delivered by a Labour government once again.
I was having a conversation about this with my sister yesterday, actually, because she's 20, turning 21 next year. And she's basically going to more or less come into this new higher higher threshold of what the wage you get depending on how old you are. And I was sort of saying to her, God, I remember having like a Saturday job at a shop when I was like 17 or whatever, and I'm sure the minimum wage for me back then was like £5 or £6 an hour, something like that. And to think that well, actually no, because that is a fair bit younger, but you get the overall point that I was making. I was just basically saying to her, it's a good thing that this is happening for you. I wish they'd done it for me back then. That would have been quite nice.
Second, I have heard representations from colleagues across this House about the carers allowance and the impact of the current policy on carers looking to increase the hours that they work, including from the honourable members for Shipley, the honourable member for Scarborough and Whitby, and the right honourable member for Kingston and Surbiton too. Carers allowance currently provides up to £81.90 per week to help those with additional caring responsibilities. Today, I can confirm that we are increasing the weekly earnings limit to the equivalent of 16 hours at the national living wage per week, the largest increase in carers allowance since it was introduced in 1976.
Ed Davies nodding. That's all I needed to see. I outsource my opinion on this matter to Ed Davey. If he's happy with it, I think it's a good thing. That's his main issue, isn't it? His social care, carers, that sort of thing. So if he's nodding, then
Yeah, the Lib Dems' main policy platform was care work during the election. So yeah, and the carers allowance, I mean, I don't really know how it works, so I can't comment on it, but from what Reeves said, it does sound like quite a good thing.
I think it's, in a nutshell, it's kind of like if you are, say you've got a family member that lives with you that's got quite severe disabilities, and you spend, hours of your day to the point that you can't really go out and work because you're spending so much of your time caring for them. The carers allowance is, I guess, kind of like a benefit that you get for being the carer of a family member rather than going out and getting a job.
I see. So basically, the way it works is if you've got a family member who is so severely disabled they can't really take care of themselves, but you can't afford a carer to do it, you basically are given what is essentially a stipend to live, because you realistically can't afford to work, because if you do work, your family member will suffer, essentially.
In a nutshell, yeah, that's my understanding of it.
All right, okay, I understand then.
Okie doke. Oh, Drew in the chat asked, Captain Swiss, are you still a carer? No, I did work in social care for quite a few years, but a few years ago I changed, so I now work in a preschool setting with the up and coming Gen Alpha, who are big fans of Spider-Man and Elsa from Frozen. I'll have you all know. So I've switched over career path slightly, but it's good fun. I enjoy what I do.
This means that a carer can now earn over £10,000 a year while receiving carers allowance, allowing them to increase their hours where they want to and keep more of their money. I am also concerned about the cliff edge in the current system and the issue of overpayments. My right honourable friend, the Work and Pensions Secretary.
Right, I will stop pausing it, but just quickly, Frank says, do you hear about Skibbity Toilet much, Swiss? And Podge says, Skibbity Swiss. Fortunately, these children are young enough that their brains have not been poisoned by the never-ending slop on the internet yet. They just talk about, cartoons and Disney Pixar films. Those are their cultural touchstones at this stage of their lives. They haven't been introduced to memes yet, thankfully. Because that would be a nightmare.
I'm partially relieved to hear that, because one of the things that slightly concerns me about the next generation, can't sound like an old man here, is basically the complete brain rot slop on the internet will just ruin their minds. So I'm glad to hear that they're not having their minds ruined by the slop that's on the godforsaken internet.
Well,
it's just kids stuff, essentially.
I can only speak for those up to about the age of 4 or 5. And anything beyond that, I've got no idea. maybe once they, probably once you're old enough where you start getting phones or iPads or whatever, then it all begins. But yeah, they're still young and innocent and unruined by the world at the age they're at the moment. Right, people are talking about defence spending. I'm going to wait until we hear about that in the actual budget, and then we'll comment on it.
Has announced an independent review to look at the issue of overpayments, and we will work across this House to develop the right solutions. Third, we will provide £1 billion from next year to extend the Household Support Fund and discretionary housing payments to help those facing financial hardship with the cost of essentials. Fourth, having heard representations from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, Trussell and others to reduce the level of debt repayments that can be taken from a household's universal credit payment each month by reducing it from 25% to 15% of their standard allowance.
Let me ask you something real quick. When Labour announced like a fair few months ago now that they were going to change the winter fuel allowance for the pensioners, and that they were going to change it so that literally the only people eligible to get the winter fuel payments would be pensioners on benefits, and everyone else would no longer get it. I think that was my understanding of it.
It's a means test. Basically, winter fuel payments went from being a universal benefit that everybody above the age of 65 got, and now it's been changed to a means tested benefit. And the criteria of it is that if you're a pensioner who is on some kind of social security, you'll get it, but excluding state pension. Well, maybe, I'm not too sure on that one. But if you are a pensioner who is not on any kind of social security benefit, you do not get winter fuel payment anymore. That's what the reform was.
Okay, and for the record, I'd say that on the whole, I am in favour of means testing it, because I certainly think that the very richest pensioners out there certainly don't need to be getting it. However, if the only threshold that you're looking at is whether you're on any kind of social security or benefit, I don't think that quite. I think that perhaps cuts it off where some people are going to really suffer and be squeezed where they shouldn't be. But anyway, that's by the by. The reason I brought it up is because when they announced it, they sort of announced it in a bit of a vacuum, and a lot of people sort of said, "Well, you've dropped this story in the news cycle. You've not really contextualized it with anything else. It's going to dominate, the talking heads in the airwaves for a while, and you're just getting bad press as a result of it. What a blunder!" Yeah, and I certainly agree to that. However, the fact that they trailed that announcement a good amount of time prior to the budget, rather than us, for example, hearing about it in the budget for the first time, takes the sting out of that being the story of the budget. If you get what I'm saying. If they were announcing that for the first time today, amidst all of the other things, there's a fair chance that would be one of the big takeaways from the budget dominating the story. But because they trailed it way earlier on, we're not really I've literally only just brought it up because that thought occurred to me. But otherwise, we probably wouldn't have discussed it today.
Yeah, it was basically a marketing sort of ploy where basically they wanted to get the worst policy announcement possible from the budget, being the very first thing people hear about from it, so that there wouldn't be the enormous backlash that they would get from the budget, and that being the only thing people focus on. The other issue as well is timing as well, with the way the position that we're in the year. Like, we're in autumn, we're probably not that about a week or so away from winter, so winter's coming up, and everybody knows that when winter happens you get the winter crisis, where the NHS gets overwhelmed by people becoming unwell from various respiratory illnesses like flu and cold. But you also get people who will suffer from illnesses due to the living conditions that they're in, people who get chest infections because of damp, cold environments, and so on and so forth. If Labour had a situation where basically the winter fuel payments dominated the headlines from now until like Christmas, and there was a pensioner who passed away as a result of poor living conditions, that would be 24/7 news coverage for them, and it would be a disaster for the party. So they made the calculation that we'll take the worst and most unpopular policy there is in the budget, put it out months in advance of the budget so people can digest it, and then when budget day comes, most people will have forgotten about it, and all the focus will be on the other things which we want people to focus on. It's pure marketing at the end of the day.
So rather than in relation to this policy being incompetent bastards, actually they might have been savvy bastards with when they chose to put it out. Again, not saying that I agree with the detail of how they've done it. I agree with means testing, but I don't think benefits was the correct cutoff point. But it's very interesting to me now joining the dots together and going, oh, yeah. As Podge in the chat says, front loading the bad news, getting that out there earlier on, had lots of weeks of bad press about it. Probably not going to be mentioned in relation to coverage of the budget in the next few days because they'll be focusing on all the other things in it.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right then.
This means that 1.2 million of the poorest households will keep more of their award each month, lifting children out of poverty, and those who benefit will gain an average of £420 a year. Madam Deputy Speaker, our plan to make work pay will also protect working people. I know that the party opposite are deeply interested in our plans here. Having seen their colleagues repeatedly dismissed at short notice, I know that they are worried about their future under the Right Honourable Member for North West Essex. So
there was that much laughing in the chamber. I thought to myself, oh, are the Tories joining in on the joke as well? But no, it's just there's that many Labour MPs that it sounds like the whole chamber's laughing. Pans to the Tory benches, stone faces the whole way. Oh dear.
They should rest easy, knowing that our plan will protect working people from unfair dismissal.
Didn't she also say Northwest? Was it Northwest Essex or Northwest Sussex?
I missed that one, I'm afraid.
Because if it was Northwest Sussex, that's Liz's Truss old seat.
Oh, you think? Oh, I see. But here's a question. They've said that they're going to protect working people, but if they're now making this claim in relation to, oh, you Tory MPs keep losing your jobs, is a Tory MP a working person in Labour's definition? There's an interesting question. Are Tories working people?
Well, technically speaking, yes, because they work. I mean, being an MP is a job.
But what if they have stocks or are landlords also, as Starmer said before?
Well, under Starmer's definition, no.
Although, did he row back on that? Did he say it and then since kind of go, oh, actually, that's not quite what I meant?
He basically said that the bit about the shares and stocks, he rolled back on that, but he kept the bit about the landlords.
Right, okay. Well, yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of landlords in Parliament, both on the Tory and Labour benches for that matter. So we've got a few MPs, at least, who aren't working people. Just a fun thought to add there. Frank says Liz Truss's seat was Southwest Norfolk, I think.
Ah, right. Okay.
Let me, just for my own benefit here, let me just have a real quick look. I just want to see where she represented. She was the MP for... Yep, it was indeed Southwest Norfolk. There we are. Thank you for that. All right, let's... Oh, my God, how much more have we got? Tom, how far through it are we, approximately? You've seen it already.
I think we're like about 40 minutes into it.
Oh, that's about halfway. All right. And anything less than halfway through, I would have been distraught. But I can live with us being halfway through. Okay.
It will safeguard them from bullying in the workplace, and it will improve their.
Camera pans to Kemi Badnock when it says bullying in the workplace.
Yeah. By the way, someone has mentioned here, if we wanted to increase the speed of it to get through it quicker, Podge has mentioned we should put the speed to 1.5. That will speed through it, because, no offence to Reeves, but she is quite a slow talker, so...
I'll tell you what, chat, those of you who have been commenting, vote yay or nay on upping it to 1.25. Vote now.
Oh, that's very fast.
No, that's less. That's actually less fast. 1.5 is a 50% increase, but 1.25 is only a 25% increase.
I vote for 1.5 because in solidarity with the bus fares going up.
Oh, you I see. You want that £3 an hour speed. We've got a bunch of yays from the chat. I'm going to do 1.25 because I think that makes it quicker without turning her into a chipmunk and meaning that we miss things. So 1.25.
All right, okay.
Access to paternity and maternity leave. I hope that the new Shadow Cabinet will soon be grateful for these increased protections at work. It is right that we protect those who have worked all their lives. In our manifesto, we promise to transfer the Investment Reserve Fund in the Mine Workers Pension Scheme to members. And I have listened closely to my honourable friends for Easington, Doncaster Central, Blanau Gwent, and Ayr, Carrick and Cumnock on this issue. Today, we are keeping our promise so that working people who powered our country receive a fair pension that they are owed. Our manifesto committed to the triple lock, meaning spending on the state pension is forecast to rise by over £31 billion by 2029-30 to ensure that our pensioners are protected in their retirement. This commitment means that while working age benefits will be uprated in line with CPI at 1.7%, the basic and new state pension will be uprated by 4.1% in 2025-26. This means that over 12 million pensioners will gain up to £470 next year, up to £275 more than if uprated by inflation. The pension credit standard minimum guarantee.
So yeah, pension triple lock that's been in place, brought in. I think it was by the Tories in 2010. The triple lock,
Yeah, it
where
was.
they've got three different measures of how to up the pension. One of them's inflation. One of them's median wage increases or something, and the other one is just a numerical figure. And whichever one is the highest, that's the one that they up it by. Therefore, ensuring that pensioners continue to get money.
I'll just look it up here. Basically, it says, according to the BBC website, the triple lock is the state pension goes up each year by either 2.5% inflation or earnings growth, whichever is the highest figure.
Hey! I was pretty spot on. Pretty spot on. I'm pleased with that. Yeah. All right. So they're keeping that, which doesn't surprise me too much because that was, I don't think they want to alienate a bunch of older voters by scrapping it.
Yeah,
the Tories are crucifying for it.
Yeah, by the way, someone mentioned here, because she said the word Islington, I think she said Islington South, if that still exists even, because the other Islington seat is Emily Thornbury.
Ah, right. Well, because Corbyn's Islington North, isn't he? So she wouldn't have been talking about Jezza.
No.
One would assume.
It was basically more than likely Islington South.
Podge says that they're doing the Tory quad lock. The quad lock?
No, they're not.
Did the Tories introduce a quad lock? Did I miss that? Or was that a thing that they were proposing at one point? Was there going to be a new measure?
It was a new measure that the Tories wanted to introduce as part of their manifesto. It was colloquially known as the quadruple lock pension, where basically it was going to be personal allowance would be an extra thing that would add on to it.
Doesn't
so
go
the
far
personal
enough.
allowance for pensioners would rise every year.
No,
Meaning that you don't
far
pay
enough.
tax on your state pension. So, in other words, it was going to be adding on making the pension tax free. That's what they wanted to do with the quadruple lock.
Quintuple lock or bust, I'm afraid. That's the only thing I'll accept.
What would be the
Quintuple lock.
What would that be? Would that be we all have to pay people pensioners? Like every single person in the country has to pay 1% of their salary to the pensioners.
The quintuple lock is whatever percent the GDP grows by in a given year is added on as a percentage to the pensioners' money. That's the quintuple lock.
I mean, at this stage, it'll probably get to the point where you'll have the centuple lock, where basically everyone below the age of 25 has to give their entire paycheck to the pensioners.
We're now introducing the sextuple lock, which is that the pension will rise in line with the FTSE 100. As the value of all stocks and shares rise, your pension will also.
Oh, God. Imagine how much that would go up by.
Oh, right. Okay. All right. Crack it on.
Will also rise by 4.1%, from around £11,400 per year to around £11,850 a year for a single pensioner. While I have sought to protect working people with measures to reduce the cost of living, I've had to take some very difficult decisions on tax. I want to set out my approach to fuel duty.
Now, fuel duty, I think, has been frozen for basically forever, right? I feel like nearly every budget we got under the Tories, they always said we have continued to freeze fuel duty. I can't remember when the last time fuel duty actually increased was.
I think, to my knowledge, fuel duty has been frozen since 2011, 2012, I think it was.
Yeah, so well over a decade it's been frozen, hasn't it? Because that was a regular staple of every Tory budget. They'd say fuel duty is still frozen.
Yeah, fuel duty, there was talks of it going up by as much as 7p a litre. But let Reeves tell you what's going to happen with that.
Okay. Pinhead Luke, by the way, says, can Swiss and Eel speed up their talking by 1.25% as well, please?
Baked into the numbers that I inherited from the previous government is an assumption that fuel duty will rise by RPI next year, and that the temporary 5p cut will be reversed. To retain the 5p cut and to freeze fuel duty again would cost over £3 billion next year. At a time when the fiscal position is so difficult, I have to be frank with the House that this is a substantial commitment to make. I have concluded that in these difficult circumstances, while the cost of living remains high, and with a backdrop of global uncertainty, increasing fuel duty next year would be the wrong choice for working people. It would mean fuel duty rising by 7p per litre. So I have decided today to freeze fuel duty next year, and I will maintain the existing.
I really thought she was going to raise fuel duty, and then she totally pulls it out of the bag. No, it's going to be frozen again. It's going to be frozen again, just as it's always been. Going to keep it froze. And is she saying it's going to go up for the following year then?
But another year too.
All right, fuel duty will continue to be frozen. Very much continuing on the same policy since the early 2010s.
There will be no higher taxes at the petrol. There will be no higher taxes at the petrol pumps next year. Madam Deputy Speaker, the last government made cuts of £20 billion to employees and self-employed national insurance in their final two budgets. These tax cuts were not honest. Because we now know that they were based on a forecast which the OBR say would have been materially different. It would have been materially different had they known the true extent of the last government's cover-up. Since July, I have been urged on multiple occasions to reconsider these cuts, to increase the taxes that working people pay and see in their payslips. But I have made an important choice today, to keep every single commitment that we made on tax in our manifesto. So I say to working people, I will not increase your national insurance, I will not increase your VAT, and I will not increase your income tax.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't expect her to break those pledges from the manifesto, to be fair. I always thought that the stuff that they laid out in the manifesto and said, we won't raise these taxes, they'd keep to it. And then anything outside of what they said, that would be the room that they play with in increasing taxes. So I'm not necessarily surprised by the fact that they're not raising these taxes, but as a bare minimum commitment for me going, I'd quite like politicians to do the things that they say they're going to do. There we are. They didn't raise the specific taxes that they said that they weren't going to raise. Credit for them keeping to their word when they do it.
Yeah, they kept to their word on
will
this
not see
thing.
higher taxes in their payslips as a result of the choices that I am making today. That is a promise made and a promise fulfilled. But any responsible chancellor would need to make difficult decisions today. To raise the revenues required to fund.
I was going to say, yeah, where are the difficult decisions, Rachel? Because we've had fuel duty frozen, we've had the taxes that you're not putting up. Now it's time for what you are going to put up.
services and to restore economic stability. So in today's budget, I'm announcing an increase in employers' national insurance contributions. We will increase the rate of employers' national insurance by 1.2 percentage points to 15% from April 2025. And we will reduce the secondary threshold, the level at which employers start paying national insurance on each employee's salary, from £9,100 a year to £5,000.
Whoa, that's quite a jump.
Yeah, that was probably the bit that was the most shocking of all, is that the national insurance increases were a lot more harsher than people thought they were going to be.
Big time. Yeah, big time. But they're pushing that onto the employers. Now, of course, I suppose the argument will go, you say if you put too much financial strain on the employers, in order to make up the difference, they'll have to end up laying people off. That's, the counter argument to that. But as far as what I'm getting in terms of priorities here, and I know I've taken the piss out of the phrase working people an awful lot in today's stream, but it does sound like they're trying to keep to the spirit of that at the very least. I know obviously employers, just like employees, are also quote unquote working people, because working people is such a stupidly vague term. But the thrust of the thrust of what I think they mean by it being that by and large we're going to try not to put these increases onto the regular man or woman with a job in the street. That seems to be what they're keeping to here. So
yeah, it does.
Okay.
This will raise £25 billion per year by the end of the forecast period. I know that this is a difficult choice. I do not take this decision lightly. We are asking businesses to contribute more, and I know that there will be impacts of this measure felt beyond businesses too, as the OBR has set out today. But in the circumstances...
Oh, yes, okay. If we're talking about further impacts, so then the other possible consequence is that if businesses are having to pay more via with national insurance, then what they will end up doing is raising the prices of their goods or services to counterbalance that. And then that cost is pushed back onto the regular man or woman on the street, because then they're paying more for the things that the businesses have raised the prices on, because the businesses are paying more national insurance, right? So
I think there's a scheme that she said that she's going to do a cut to that will incentivize them to not do that, which she explains a little bit here, but I'm not sure what it's called. Start with an E.
Okay. See, this is it, guys. You can't pull one lever and make a thing go up without making another thing go down. Hang on a sec. I'm just going to stick the light on because it's starting to get a little bit dark in the room here. I'm back. Also raised sugar tax, says Grave Peril. Oh, spoilers. Spoilers, Grave Peril. I've not heard about the sugar tax yet. That's going to affect the man and woman on the street. People love sugar.
Order, Chancellor, order! Our constituents are watching. They need to be able to hear the Chancellor.
Yeah.
Simmer down.
Simmer down.
But in the circumstances that I have inherited, it is the right choice to make. Successful businesses depend on successful schools. Healthy businesses depend on a healthy NHS. And a strong economy depends on strong public finances. If the party opposite chooses to oppose this choice, then they are choosing more austerity, more chaos, more instability. This is the choice that our country faces too. As I make this choice, I know it is particularly important to protect our smallest companies. So having heard representations from the Federation of Small Businesses and others, I am today increasing the employment allowance from £5,000 to £10,500. This means 865,000 employers won't pay any national insurance at all next year. And
So hang on, what's she saying there? She's saying that although the threshold for paying the higher rate of national insurance is going to be lowered, there's also going to be a threshold, I think, for employers not having to pay any national insurance whatsoever. A bit like, I suppose, when you think about income tax, with income tax, there's a certain amount of money that we can earn before we get taxed on it, and then beyond that, it's different thresholds for what the rate of that taxation is. So there's going to be some employers that are not paying any national insurance now, is what I'm gathering from this.
That seems to be the case, yes.
Okie dokie.
And will pay the same or less than they did previously.
And Podge says you've had that cough for about 2 years. Do you have long COVID? Oh, I don't know, Podge. Maybe. I you know what? I certainly feel that since the COVID pandemic, I've got more ill more often than I was before. I'm
The funny
not,
thing,
you know.
the funny thing is it's a bit of a mixed situation for me because my uncle has actually got long COVID, but in a weird sort of way. You know how one of the symptoms of COVID, it might still be a symptom now, but back when it was new, one of the symptoms of COVID was the loss of your sense of taste and smell.
Yeah.
That's what my uncle has to this very day. Like
Really?
he can't taste anything or smell anything anymore. So every bit of food for him is just basically a difference in texture. There's no taste for him anymore, which is why he has lost actually a lot of weight because he just doesn't eat anymore because eating doesn't give him any sort of sense of enjoyment. It's just a chore for him now.
That's first of all terrible for your uncle. But it's also fascinating to me that like that's been his experience with COVID. That even now he still no longer has any taste or smell. I think I've had COVID twice, perhaps. I don't think losing taste or smell was ever a symptom for me when I've had it. I had all the other symptoms. I never had those ones. So it's really strange to me, just the nature of this virus and just the way that it functions differently on different people. You know.
The funny thing is I actually, since the COVID pandemic, I've been a lot less ill than I was in the past, which is a bit strange. But that might have been an impact because I actually did get COVID at one point. I got it back in April of 2023. And to be honest, it didn't really do much of anything to me. I've had colds that were way worse than COVID. It was really a mild cold, but then again, by that point, I had had 4 COVID jabs, so that's probably why it didn't have much of an impact on me. Whereas my uncle, he got COVID in March of 2020, so that's probably why he is in the situation he's in at the moment.
I've got a comment here as well from Grave Peril that says also you're mixing with kids and they are germ factories. You're absolutely right, and people where I work get ill all the time because of all the kids coughing and sneezing on them. So it does muddy the waters slightly in trying to distinguish what my health has been like since COVID, because I had that career change a year or two after COVID, and now I'm in an environment where you get ill a lot more often anyway. So it's hard to say. Right. How much more of this have we got left? 1:16:15 is where we're at now. Let me just.
Of the economy.
Oh, she's still talking 20 minutes from now.
She's
still talking 30 minutes from now. Oh my god. Okay.
I think the thing with this is it's going to go on for such a long time that I have got a little BBC article where they finally got together the key points at a glance. So if you want, you can just go to the BBC website and just find that article, and we can read through the key points.
You know what? I will ask the viewers because this stream is for their benefit. What would you prefer, folks? Would you like us to press on through with the stream and hear it from Rachel Reeves's mouth, or would you like us to just skip on over to an article with some of the highlights? Let us know what you'd prefer. NA says the total time was about 1 hour and 15 minutes. I watched it all live. Podge has voted for the article. How much have you got left? About half an hour, maybe on 1.25 speed. That makes about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. But if you then factor in me and Tom pausing it to discuss things every few minutes, we're probably looking at least another hour of streaming, at least.
Yeah, I mean, Frank has said that there's a bit the transport section's interesting, but the article I've got has got a whole section dedicated to transport, so um yeah.
Yeah, you know what? Well, let's go with the article. Let's go with the article. Folks,
The article
you can.
title,
Yeah.
by the way, if you want to know, it's
Oh, yeah,
called it's on the BBC website. It's called Budget 2024 Key Points at a Glance.
Thank you very
That's
much.
the name of the article.
Let me search for that now. Budget 2024. Budget 2024. Key points at a glance. Here we are. All right then.
Right.
So I'm literally just going to go down the list. We might end up retreading some stuff that we've already seen. So rates of income tax, national insurance, and VAT to remain unchanged. Income tax band thresholds to rise in line with inflation after 2028, preventing more people being dragged into the higher bands as wages rise. So within that is also the bit the bit that's not said out loud, which is that they will remain frozen until 2028. So from now until 2028, people will continue to get dragged into higher bands as a result of inflation. But then from 2028 onwards, they'll rise in line with inflation and people will probably stay within the bands they're already in. That's my takeaway from that then.
Yeah, it's kind of a 50-50 thing, but because on the one hand, it means fiscal drag is going to continue for the next 4 years, which sucks. But on the other hand, there is also the fact that fiscal drag looks like the end of it will finally be in sight, which is something I didn't expect to see with the budget.
We've also got basic, capital gains tax. Okay, this seems like a big one. Basic rate capital gains tax on profits from selling shares to increase from 10% to 18%. That's quite an increase, with the higher rate rising from 20% to 24%.
Yeah, that was unexpected how much she was going to increase capital gains tax by. The figures I saw showed that she was going to increase capital gains tax by 6% on the lower rate and 2% on the higher rate, but she's basically increased it by a lot more than what people thought she would.
So that in itself is probably one of the fairly bigger policies in terms of what's going to be raising this revenue that's paying for the other stuff then.
Yes.
Although, of course, we need to keep in mind that it says it's taxes on profits from selling shares. And as we know, people who own shares are not working people. So don't worry. I've given you my cough. All right. It's whenever I laugh. It's whenever I make myself laugh on the stream. Right then, rates on profits from selling additional property unchanged. Inheritance tax. This was one that was spoken about a great amount beforehand. What they were going to do with this inheritance tax threshold freeze extended by a further 2 years to 2030, with unspent pension pots also subject to the tax from 2027. Okay, so what does that mean then? So that means that for the next 3 years at least, there are no changes to inheritance tax. From 2027 onwards, unspent pension pots will be taxed before they're passed on to the inheritors. And then they're giving themselves the wiggle room that from 2030 onwards, maybe we will increase inheritance tax, but that's 5 years from now.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what they're saying. They're essentially saying that inheritance tax is going to be frozen until 2027. Oh no, 2030. But unspent pension pots, which basically means any money left over from your pension will be taxed from 2027 onwards. That's essentially what they're saying with inheritance tax. And then after 2030, they may or may not do something with inheritance tax. But honestly, by that point, who honestly knows if Labour will still be in government by then? So it's basically essentially the only change that has been made to inheritance tax is any money that is unspent from the pension will be taxed from 2027 onwards. But other than that, inheritance tax is staying the same.
So in terms of, sort of, I don't know, say for example, and I'm plucking numbers out the air here, but say for example, Grandad, dearly departed Grandad had, I don't know, £200,000 in the bank or something. There's not any changes being made to how much of that will be taxed at this point in time. It will be in terms of what the pension pot was. The same goes, I'm assuming, the property that a relative lived in or something. I'm guessing that whatever taxes are on that are remaining the same. They are not going to be increased more than they were before either. So yeah, as we've outlined, it's just the pension pots. But 2030, all bets are off. You never know what they'll do after that. But that's the next parliament. We're only just getting through this parliament at the moment. Okay, so inheritance tax, they've not really touched inheritance tax then. Not hugely. No. Okay. Exemptions when inheriting farmland to be made less generous from 2026. Sucks to be you, farmer. Okay. Business taxes. Companies to pay national insurance at 15% on salaries above £5,000 from April, up from 13.8% on salaries above £9,100, raising an additional £25 billion a year. Well, look, we had our two little piles, didn't we, of the many billions of spend and the many billions of revenue or savings, and 25 billion, that's a substantial stack towards the other half.
Yeah, it's honestly incredible how much money the government makes from some taxes. Like, just increasing national insurance on employers by not that much has basically paid for the entire black hole budget. Like, that is quite remarkable how much money the government makes from just a single tax.
I mean, it's almost as if once you're unshackled from doing the sorts of things in budgets that the Tories do, and instead doing different types of things in budgets, suddenly you can make money appear from all these different places that you never thought of before. Because the Tories never would have wanted to do that sort of thing.
I mean, VAT is another one as well. They didn't increase it, but apparently I saw that if they increased VAT from 20% to 25%, they would pay for the entire budget just with that one tax increase. Because 25% of all government revenue comes from VAT just on its own.
Wow. Right. What else have we got here? Tax paid by private equity managers on shares of profits from successful deals to rise from 28% up to 32% in April. Yeah, that's good. That's fine. To be honest, this is the sort of laboury type stuff that I kind of, when you ask, even if you're going to ask me in the abstract about my vague priorities of what sort of bits of the economy should we be taxing more, and I generally say, well, it shouldn't be the poor people. It should be the rich or the businesses or whatever. By and large, that seems to be the route that they're going down here. They're doing the sort of stuff that I would hope for in a Labour budget. And I'm saying that really, really cautiously, because you never know what might come along when I scroll further down the page. But I've been pleasantly surprised by my lack of disappointment in this budget, if that makes sense. Not that I'm amazingly enthused about it, but just that I was anticipating a certain level of disappointment, and that hasn't quite happened. So, I don't know.
Yeah, it seems to be, by all accounts, to be your prototypical Labour budget more than it is anything unique.
Yeah, it's just, I suppose the real change just comes from the fact that, oh, look, it's Labour doing a budget instead of the Tories. The fundamental differences between Labour and the Tories are now making themselves felt. And because I've been used to only ever seeing Tory budgets for the past decade and a half, some of these things seem really radical just because they were the sorts of changes that were off limits with the Tory ideology as opposed to the Labour ideology.
Yeah, I mean, it is worth keeping in mind. The news has emphasised it a lot. This is the first Labour budget in nearly a decade and a half.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So we've had our sort of our baseline set at Tory budgets for such a long time. Suddenly, Labour budget comes along. We're going, oh, what? You can put taxes up on employers and not the poor, really? Can you? I didn't know
Well,
this.
I mean, yeah, I mean, and for some people in here, such as myself, for example, the last time there was a Labour government, I was a kid, and now I'm a young adult, which really just shows you how huge the time gap has been.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was 16 years old when the Tories took power in 2010. So we're not that far apart in age, are we? I think like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I'm 24, almost 25,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, but for both of us, for that matter, we've not, neither of us have had a Labour government in our adult lives. Main rate of corporation tax paid by businesses on taxable profits over 250,000 to stay at 25% until the next election. So no change to corporation tax there. Transport, 5p cut in fuel duty on petrol and diesel brought in by the Conservatives, due to end in April 2025, will be kept for another year, as we saw announced. The £2 cap on single bus fares in England will rise to £3 from January. We've discussed that one already. Commitment to fund tunnelling work to take HS2 high-speed rail line to Euston Station in central London. Commitment to deliver upgrade to the Transpennine rail line between York and Manchester, running via Leeds and Huddersfield. Air passenger duty on flights by private jet to go up by 50%.
Rishi Sunak was not happy about that one. I'll tell you that much.
I'm sorry, but my only reaction to that is just, oh, boo-hoo. Oh, the people with private jets have to pay more money.
Yeah,
how
it's basically
sad for you. Oh.
Yeah, it's basically, you know that Jeremy Clarkson meme on Top Gear, you know the "oh no" anyway meme.
Yeah.
It's basically
Oh
that.
no.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, exactly. But I don't think these private jet types are working people. They probably own stocks.
No, they're not.
Nah, it's fine. It's good. You know what? I'm beginning to embrace the whole Labour working people line. The more I'm playing around with it, the more I'm having fun with it. Extra 500 million next year to repair potholes in England. My God, it just never ends, does it? I feel like every budget ever has always announced money for potholes because there's just that many potholes. I've got no context or indication whatsoever whether 500 million is a lot of money in terms of potholes or virtually no money in terms of potholes. I have no idea.
The
I have no
roads
clue.
the roads are so bad that it unfortunately isn't much money. It'll probably fix a city's potholes and that'll be it because they're everywhere. I mean, it's not a surprise because we're such a car-centric country outside of London, so it's not a surprise there's so many potholes. But I wish there was more money for potholes.
Yeah. I'll just go back to what I said before, which is that I really don't know. I did. You know what? It will just have to be look at the roads in a few years' time and see if they meaningfully have less potholes than they did before. That'll be a better indicator for me than whatever figure they put on how much they're spending. Drinking and smoking. Oh, here we go. New tax of £2.20 per 10 millilitres of vaping liquid introduced from October 2026. Well,
Tax on the vapes.
Quite a bit, yeah. But I mean, that's vaping liquid. Obviously, disposable vape, the single-use ones. I think they'd already announced that they were going to ban those at some point, weren't they?
Yeah, they were.
So in a way, for a split second, I went, "Oh, well, that's good. I'm not going to have to pay more because the thing that I use isn't going to be taxed more. It's just going to be banned instead. So I won't be able to have it at all, and then I'll have to switch to the thing that is being taxed more. But you know, it's built in. I can grumble and complain, but I basically accept the premise that they're always going to fucking squeeze money out of people addicted to nicotine. It's just the way of it. Whatever.
Yeah.
Tax on tobacco to increase 2% above inflation. Yeah, of course, above inflation. And 10% above inflation. What? 10% above inflation for hand-rolling tobacco? That's outrageous. Why? Well, no, Swiss. You just said that you accept it as a given that people 10% above inflation. But that's for hand-rolling tobacco, though. That's the better one. It's better to roll your own cigarettes than to smoke the pre-made ones. There's a lot more tar and cack in them ones than the.
Oh dear.
Anyway, moving on. Tax. I'm beginning to go, oh, boo-hoo, the private jets. Oh, boo-hoo. And then there's people probably watching this going, oh, boo-hoo, the smokers. Oh, boo-hoo, poisoning yourself. Oh, no.
For me, the syntaxes are basically water off of a duck's back because I just don't do any of this stuff. I don't smoke. I can't because I've got asthma. So if I do smoke, it makes me really, really ill. So it doesn't affect me at all. I only drink on Christmas and my birthday. Don't drink outside of that. And I barely eat any sugary food. So it doesn't affect me at all. The syntaxes just don't have any impact on me whatsoever.
That's fair. That's fair. And I guess what I'll say, if I want to try and put a nice spin on it, is despite the fact that from this budget so far, me personally, I will be paying 50% more for my bus tickets, and undoubtedly more if I want to continue consuming nicotine. And God knows I'm not quitting at the moment. Despite those things, I still feel fairly good overall about the budget. So maybe that speaks to the strength of the rest of it.
The only thing that did concern me about syntaxes is they were thinking about extending the sugar tax to milk-based beverages. This is a slight bit concerning to me because I do like milk-based beverages, and it's the only thing that I consume that is in any way somewhat unhealthy. So that's a bit concerning for me. If that happens,
yeah, I'll agree. I'll agree with that. I'll agree with that. And this is me speaking as a person who doesn't consume that many milk-based beverages, but I'll still be on your side with it, Tom. And I'll say, yeah, a can of Coke, sure. A milkshake, no, I don't think that's necessarily what should be targeted. But hey ho, you know what? If I've got to pay more to smoke, you have to pay more to drink milk. Suck it. That's that's the Labour government for you. Tax on non-draft alcoholic drinks to increase by the higher RPI measure of inflation, but tax on draft drinks cut by 1.7. Okay, right. So if it's poured from the pump, then it's cut, but if it's provided in a bottle, then it increases. So a bit one way, a bit the other. Nah, whatever. Wages, benefits, and pensions. Legal minimum wage for over 21s to rise from 11.44 to 12.21 per hour from April. Yeah, solid. All right, cool. Rate from 18 to 20-year-olds to go up from £8.60 to £10 as part of the long-term plan to move towards an adult single fare. Yep, good. Basic and new state pension payments to go up by 4.1% next to the triple lock, more than working age benefits, same old, triple lock. Eligibility widened for the allowance paid to full-time carers. Yep, we heard about that one. Government spending and public services. Extra 22.6 billion for day-to-day spending on the... Oh, hello. Extra 22.6 billion for day-to-day spending on the NHS in England and a 3.1 billion boost to budget for investment. Now, usual thing that I've said pretty much all the way through this, which is when I hear this many billion for this, I don't necessarily understand what it means in that context of how much it's truly worth. But 22 more billion for the NHS on day-to-day spending sounds good. Does it outpace inflation? That's probably the key question. Is it more for the NHS than would have to go up just because of inflation existing?
I honestly don't know that question, so I just can't answer it.
All right. Well, what can I say? Sounds nice. Sounds nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. 6.7 billion allocated for education investment next year, with 1.4 billion earmarked for rebuilding over 500 schools. Again, we're in that sort of fog of kind of big number of billion for very large scale stuff. Sounds nice. Sounds good. Okay. Defense spending to rise by 2.9 billion next year. Well, you know what? There was a lot being made. I remember earlier on there were a few of you guys commenting about the increase in defense spending in the chat, and sort of being against it and kind of saying, spending more on nukes and this, that, and the other when there's all these other priorities. But just within the context of looking at this, if we're talking about like 22 billion more for the NHS, if we're talking about like 6, 7, 8 billion more for schools, 3 billion more for defense, actually in that context, I'm kind of all right with. I'm not, I don't feel as if that, some child is having their education stolen from them or a person's health is declining purely for the sake of putting more money into national security. It seems like it's being raised, but actually there's other stuff being raised quite a lot more. So I'm all right with that personally. The whole rigmarole, Russia, Ukraine, the state of the world at the moment, the unpredictability of it all. I'm all right with that. I'm fine.
Yeah, I mean, we do. I mean, I do think that Britain shouldn't be as interventionist as it is in global affairs, but I do think we should have an army and a nuclear weapons arsenal, because if there was to ever be a situation where, God forbid, we did find ourselves in a war, I would like to know that the army could defend the country from foreign aggression if it ever got to that point.
Yeah, I think that what I really don't want to see is a return to sort of like the 2000s era interventionism where we go on over to this country and that country and the other country and go, we don't like your dictator, we're going to come in and sort him out and this, that. That seemed like too much meddling that often wasn't well thought through enough and had quite dire consequences. But as far as the idea of just carrying a really big fucking stick so people don't mess with you, to put it in the layman's terms, that's fine. I'm all right with that.
It's essentially the attitude I have to defence is one of, I don't want to intervene in your country's affairs because I don't care what you do. But if you attack my country to try and interfere in my affairs, well, I'm going to defend myself in the best way I possibly can with all the resources available to me.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd agree with that principle, extending it out to also saying and like allies of ours, like like with NATO, for example, that sort of thing.
And allied countries as well. I would extend the same courtesy to somewhere like Estonia or Germany as an example, because they're allies of us. Basically, I think the British Army should be similar to the Ukrainian armed forces, where the whole reason that exists is to stop Russia from conquering all of Ukraine.
Exactly, and not to mention that Ukraine is obviously, it's a country that we look at Ukraine and we go, right, you are a democracy. You've toyed with the idea of joining the European Union. You're very much more in our camp than anyone else's camp, and you have been attacked and you are requesting help. Seems reasonable enough. You see someone getting mugged in the street, you do the brave thing and go assist them. But NA says we still supply jet parts to Israel, so we are intervening still. What I'll say, NA, is that perhaps we can appreciate that it's a different level of intervening in other people's affairs than, say, boots on the ground in Iraq or Afghanistan. But certainly, as far as the ongoing Israel-Gaza, all of that going on right now, I would personally like us as a country as far away from all that as possible. I would like us to provide humanitarian aid to anyone who needs it and nothing else, personally. Right. Housing. Social housing providers to be allowed to increase rents above inflation under multi-year settlement. Okay, interesting. Social housing providers to be allowed to increase rents above inflation under multi-year settlement. That sounds like people are going to have to be paying more than they were before.
I'm not too sure how it works.
Allowed to increase rents above inflation. That very much does sound like they will be allowed to charge more. They will be allowed to up the rents. Basically.
Yeah, that's odd. There's some stuff there about stamp duty going up from 3% to 5%, which is actually good. I'd say.
Current so social housing provider. I'm always we always sort of bang on and say we need more social housing than we've got at present anyway. But this at least is to say the existing social housing, they could put the rents up higher than they are at the moment anyway, which obviously would not necessarily be beneficial for the tenants. So I don't know what I'm missing here, whether there's some additional dynamic to it or whether it's just a straight up look, it's more income for us as the people providing social housing or what. I don't know. But on the face of it, I've read that and gone, that's not in line with the other feel-good policies I've heard so far. Current affordable homes budget, which runs until 2026, boosted by 500 million. Again, I don't really know what that means or how much it's worth or whatever, but sounds nice, so cool. Office for Budget Responsibility predicts we've read that one. We've done inflation. Official definition of UK government debt loosened by including a wider range of financial assets, such as future student loan repayments. So this was one that had been trailed before the budget a bit, where they were saying that they were going to change the definition of how they calculate the debt in order to make it appear that we have less debt or that we're allowed to borrow more relative to the amount of debt we've got, that kind of thing.
This was basically Rachel Reeves revising her fiscal rules to allow her to borrow more money for infrastructure projects.
All right then.
And then the final one.
Just quickly, sorry. NA says, I'd highly recommend looking into the policy of housing first. It's worked really well in places it's been implemented, like Finland, in reducing homelessness. Thank you for that, NA.
We actually know someone in the chat, the Twitter one, who is Finnish. So when he pops up, we'll ask him about this to inquire about it, because I don't really know what that is.
Yeah, no, good shout. Where were we up to with this? So what I'll say about the recategorization of how they calculate the debt. I'm not sure how I feel about this. Sometimes I need to put things through a lens of saying, if the Tories did it, how would I feel about it, in order to try and stay a bit fair and impartial, given that I'm vastly more a Labour person than I am a Tory person. So if the Tories had done it, I would have gone, look at this. They're just cooking the books. They're just cooking the books to make it look like that they've got less debt than they actually have. They haven't materially changed anything other than the way they're calculating stuff. So it's going to appear better than it presently is, even though nothing manifestly will have altered in the actual economy. Therefore, that needs to be the criticism I level at Labour on this matter as well. I suppose the counterpoint to that is you would then say, does this bring us more or less in line with the way that other countries calculate what their debt is? If it's, for example, most, European countries, if it's making us more similar to how other similar countries calculate their debt, then I'd say, all right, fair enough. If it's making us more different from them and making it look better relative to them being more honest per se, then I don't think it's a helpful measure. So I think it kind of depends on what the standard is supposed to be. But I don't know how I feel about this. I think I'm skeptical of it, is the best way to put it. But I don't. Oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah. They're just going on to the final three things. The one about the compensation, we've talked about that before.
Yeah.
Then there's the part about the government will stop receiving surplus cash from pension scheme from mine workers. Okay, that's fine, I guess.
I can't say I knew much about that to begin with. Government to stop receiving surplus cash from pension scheme for mine workers.
I didn't even know that was a thing, to be honest.
No, nor did I. So there had been a thing where some of the money in a pension scheme for mine workers was going to the government if it was more than it was expected to be or should have been or something. And now they're not going to get. Oh, okay, so I suppose that's good if you're a mine worker pensioner. Extra spending in England will lead to 3.4 billion more for Scotland, 1.7 billion more for Wales, and 1.5 billion more for Northern Ireland in devolution payments.
Yeah, the old Barnett formula, basically, and that was the budget of 2024.
And that was okay. So yeah, I would say that actually, it wasn't as totally doom and gloom and horrible and austerity light as I'd been led to worry that it could be. It actually felt refreshingly different from Tory budgets.
Yeah, I will say as much. I was very, very wrong about what the budget was going to be like because I went into it this morning expecting an absolute battering from the government, but instead, this has actually been quite a prototypical New Labour budget. Like, this is the type of thing that New Labour would have done back in the day. It's not unusual for Labour whatsoever. So I am surprised. Is it perfect? No, not by any means. There's a lot that I would have preferred to have happened. Like, I would have preferred more money to be spent. But overall, it's far better than what I thought it was going to be. I was expecting an apocalyptically awful budget, and instead, what we've ended up with is just a prototypical Labour budget.
Yeah, I'd say that it's it's not been anything vastly exciting or optimistic in saying these are all the brilliant new things that we're going to do because of this, and this. But that said, when it comes to certain figures that are put around, like this many billion for housing, this many billion for education, this many billion for the NHS, I find it difficult to really understand the impact that those numbers have one way or the other, for better or for worse. But so certainly, I think in where it feels the priorities are in terms of who is shouldering the burden of tax increases, it certainly seems to be skewed much more towards the wealthier and the employers rather than the worse off and the employees. And, that instinctively feels like the right side of the argument to be on for me. So, like you said, quintessential Labour budget, I suppose, but it's just that refreshing for me to actually see a Labour budget for the first time in a decade and a half,
It is indeed. I guess the ultimate question moving forward will be, will people feel any of the benefit from it moving forward? And ultimately, that will be a question for time, really. We won't really know for many, many months.
Yeah, no, it will take time, certainly. I think that I will say, by the way, I'm kind of pleased that I did say a few times since the election I'm reserving my sort of judgment or condemnation or what have you for this government until I've seen the budget, because I've got a more positive view of the government now with the budget than I did prior to the budget. So I suppose in a sense, actually, that therefore must make it a successful budget in my eyes. This is wild stuff. I'm having to sort of negotiate with myself verbally the fact that I seem to be approving of this, but that in fact is what is happening. I've come out of this feeling better about it than I did going in, which is definitely something, I suppose. It doesn't mean I've got any greater love for Keir Starmer than I had before, but hey, this is much more the direction that I would have wanted the country to go in under Labour as opposed to the Tories. That seems to be happening, so that's good. But of course, like you say, the proof is very much going to be in the pudding of all these measures that have been brought in. Will it change things for the better? Will people feel better off? Will our services seem like they're going to improve? Will they succeed in getting the debt down for day-to-day spending? Will it turn out to be a massive mistake that they've changed these rules on how they calculate the debt? There's an awful lot of questions that remain to be answered about the effects of this budget and ultimately whether Labour end up being good stewards of the economy or not. But at the least, as I've said a few times now, I feel like their priorities are much more aligned to my own than the Tories ever were. So that's something, at least. And what else have we got here? Rishi got very irate about the budget in his response. Oh, I'm sorry, Rishi, but we decided to stop watching, so we're not going to see you getting irate. I might check it out later.
Yeah.
Will be the last time he has the limelight in this parliament. And NA also adds the next Tory leader will be announced on Friday. Well, it's about time. Yeah, it's about time. We've had such a ever since the election, really, we've had such a period of just phony war, non-entity politics where Labour took power, the Tories were having leadership contest, but for the duration of about 3 months or so, we were still waiting for the Labour budget, and the Tories didn't have a new permanent leader yet. We're finally moving past that, and we're going to get back into the regular cut and thrust of politics and seeing how the government actually ends up doing and all the rest of it,
And that's also probably the last big thing we'll hear about British politics for this year, because next week we have got the American election.
Yes, indeed. Are you likely to be available to join me for that stream?
Yep, I will be available.
Fantastic.
We won't. What I will say though is this about the election. Every single poll that I have seen shows that this election is going to be ultra close. It will be one of the closest, most hard-fought elections in US political history. And as a result, I don't think we should do a multi-hour long stream that go like we did with the general election, and instead 3-4 hours maybe, because we're not going to get the winner on the day of the election. It will take days for the winner to be declared.
I mean, I'm certainly not going to complain at that idea, because the thought of not having to stay up the entire night is a bit more appealing to me. But I'll say this much at the very least. Then I think that I want to stream on the night of the US election up until the point that I no longer feel I'm going to get any more significant informational results by staying awake, as opposed to just going to sleep and seeing how things look 10 hours later or whatever.
Yeah, that's a good way of doing it, in my opinion.
All right, then. That's fine. And then Grave Peril says, then Trump will fight it if he loses. Well, I mean, this is the thing. It kind of already seems sort of baked in at this point. But obviously, if Trump does lose, he's going to say he didn't actually lose, just like last time.
Yeah.
That seems to be just a kind of an assumption of it at this point, really. I cannot conceivably see Trump losing and then going, yes, I accept defeat. The election was totally fair. Kamala Harris and the Democrats beat me fair and square. I will now graciously step off the stage. It's not happening.
Yeah, it won't happen.
But you know what? That's a problem for next week, and primarily for the Americans to worry about. So there we are. We seem to be getting our shit in order in this country finally. It's taken a while.
It took a while, but it's moving in that direction, it seems.
Oh, all right then. Tupac stole my bike. Says, I don't know why people are saying it's close. The bookies are leaning heavily to Trump, unfortunately. This is the thing. I keep hearing really competing things. Only a few days ago when I did a stream, I said, I'm hearing all these noises about it being really good looking for Trump. And then I saw some stuff completely counter to that, talking about the early voting apparently being really good for the Democrats and Kamala Harris. So I really don't know what to make of it. I know that as a tendency, I know that, Tom's disappeared. I know that as a tendency, on the night itself, you tend to get it looking better for the Republicans at near the beginning of the night, because it will be more rural areas that get their counts done quicker, that report in first, and then the more urban areas with more votes to count tend to take longer to report, but then they're the ones that lean more Democrat. So gradually you'll get that shift in the results over the night. But as far as this early voting stuff goes, I don't know. I have heard that Trump's encouraging all of his voters to go and vote early as much as possible. I've had a look at some of the polls in some of the swing states, and I think the most recent ones I've looked at probably has Trump ahead in slightly more of the swing states than Kamala Harris. But then again, some of those are only by a point or two, which is certainly in the margin of error. So I can see it being close, assuming the indicators that we're trying to go off at the moment are anywhere near accurate. And you never know if they are or not. But I can believe, by the way, on the point that Tupac Stole My Bike says, that you can have what ultimately ends up being a close race. However, you could still have, when people are trying to put money on who's going to win, all right, more people are putting money on Trump. That, those two things don't necessarily cancel each other out. Betting markets only take you so far when it comes to trying to predict how something's going to go. A few more things here. NA says, remember, Clinton was supposed to have had a 90% chance of winning and lost. Oh, yeah. Well, there we are. Very fair point that you've brought into the mix there. So, I'm coming into this US election next week very much hand on heart, very honestly saying to you, I don't know how it's going to go. I really do not know how it's going to go. There have been times in the past that I felt a lot more certain, but now that it's around the corner, I feel very uncertain. It's going to be genuinely, it's going to be totally different from the election that we had earlier in the year, where we knew what the result was going to be before it even started. We knew Labour was going to be in. We knew Labour was going to be in with a pretty good majority. We just didn't know the finer details of it. With this one, it could be one way or the other. There's just no way of knowing, is there? Anyway, guys, I want to say thank you to Tom, who's no longer here, unfortunately, but I appreciate you joining me for all of that and offering your thoughts on the budget with me. Thank you very much to you guys in the chat as well, offering all your comments. Apologies, as always, to some of those that I didn't read out, but I do try and do the majority of them and at least one or two from each person. If you've enjoyed the stream, please do drop me a like. It helps with the YouTube algorithm. And I guess I will see you guys tomorrow for, oh my goodness, Halloween. Well, I've got something planned for tomorrow. Have I got a Halloween stream tomorrow, NA? Oh, I've got something. Be afraid. Be very afraid.